6 motorcycles, 6 strangers, soaking wet, stranded in the middle of nowhere, and every single one of them broken down at my door. Evelyn Harper didn't call for help that night. She didn't lock up and go inside. She just rolled up her sleeves, grabbed her wrench, and went to work for free on machines belonging to men most people cross the street to avoid. She never asked for anything in return. She had no idea what was coming. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm came in from the west, the way desert storms always did, without apology and without warning. One moment the sky was bruised purple at the edges, the next it cracked open and dropped everything it had onto 40 miles of empty highway. Rain hit the asphalt so hard it bounced back up. Lightning walked across the mesa in long white legs. Thunder followed close behind, the kind that didn't rumble so much as detonate, shaking the windows in their frames and rattling the coffee mug on the workbench until it tipped sideways and bled dark liquid across a stack of old repair invoices. Evelyn Harper heard the thunder and didn't flinch. She was 68 years old, and she had lived in the Arizona high desert long enough to understand that the land didn't care about you. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was simply indifferent, and the only way to survive indifference was to refuse to take it personally. She was underneath a 2009 Ford F250 when the first headlights swept across the garage floor, throwing long shadows through the gap beneath the truck. The light registered that it was more than one source, several sources actually, and then went back to tightening a slip joint on the truck's exhaust system. The bolts were rusted through. They always were out here. Everything rusted eventually, even in the desert. Evelyn had learned that the hard way 22 years ago when she tried to replace the brake lines on Roy's old Chevy and stripped 4 bolts in a row because she hadn't soaked them in penetrating oil first. Roy had laughed, not cruelly but warmly, and handed her the can of WD-40 that she still kept on the second shelf to this day, the original label worn to near illegibility. Roy Harper had been dead for 11 years. The garage was still his. The tools were still his. The invoices, the coffee mug, the calendar on the wall, frozen 2 months behind the actual date, all of it still felt like Roy's. Evelyn had never quite figured out how to make the space her own without feeling like she was erasing him. So she hadn't. She just worked inside his memory and tried to be useful. The sound of engines outside cut through the rain, not one engine, but multiple, and all of them sounding wrong. She heard the sputter and cough of machines running rough, the kind of sound that made a mechanic's ear prick up the way a doctor's might when someone walked in favoring one leg. Something was wrong with those bikes. More than one thing. She could hear it clearly even over the rain. She slid out from under the truck and stood up. Through the main window, the big one Roy had installed the year they opened the one that faced the highway, she could see them pulling into her lot. 6 motorcycles. Big machines, Harleys by the look of the silhouettes, stripped down and road-hardened. The riders wore soaked leather and moved like men who had been on the road long enough that their bodies had stopped registering discomfort. They were scanning the property with the careful automatic attention of people who were accustomed to reading new environments fast. Evelyn walked to the door and opened it. The rain was loud on the gravel. The nearest rider, a big man broad across the shoulders, gray-bearded, wearing a black leather vest darkened further by the rain, looked up when he heard the door. He met her eyes across the distance of the lot, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. He had expected an empty building maybe, or a light that meant someone inside reluctant to come out. He hadn't expected the door to just open. "You need something," Evelyn called out. Not unfriendly, not warm, just direct. The man with the gray beard walked toward her. He moved with the deliberate ease of someone who had learned long ago that hurrying only made people nervous. "Our bikes are giving us trouble," he said. "Some kind of electrical issue. Maybe fuel, I don't know. We've been limping for the last 15 miles. Evelyn looked past him at the row of motorcycles. Even in the rain, she could see the problem, or rather, she could hear it. The ones that were still running were misfiring. The ones that weren't were dead cold, which meant they'd been pushed. 2 of them had been pushed. In this rain. "How many of you are there?" she said. 6. "How long you been on the road?" "Since Flagstaff, about 4 hours. Evelyn did the math. Flagstaff to here in 4 hours in this weather with bikes that were already failing. They'd been fighting it for most of the ride. Get them inside, she said, all six. The man with the gray beard paused. Ma'am, we can pay for the space. I didn't say anything about payment, Evelyn said. I said get them inside. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Move. She went back into the garage and started clearing space. His name was Ryder. She found that out about 20 minutes later when he crouched down beside her as she was pulling the fuel line on the first of the bikes, a Heritage Softail, that was running but barely, the engine popping and backfiring every few seconds in a rhythm that made her teeth ache. He didn't offer his name like an introduction. He just said it like he was checking she had it. Ryder, he said. Evelyn, she said, and handed him a flashlight. Hold that. Point it there. He held the flashlight exactly where she directed, without question, which she appreciated. Some men, most men in her experience, couldn't take direction from a woman in a garage without making it awkward. Ryder just held the light. The other 5 bikers had spread out through the space with the instinctive situational awareness of people who knew how to occupy a room without crowding it. 2 of them were sitting on the workbench, arms crossed, watching her work with expressions she couldn't quite read, not hostile, not friendly, somewhere in between. One had found the old folding chair in the corner and sat backward in it, chin resting on his crossed arms. Another 2 stood near the door, still looking outside as if expecting something to change about the weather. None of them talked much. They talked to each other occasionally in low voices, in the abbreviated language of people who had spent a lot of time together and had reduced most communication to essential shorthand. They didn't talk to Evelyn beyond answering her questions, and her questions were technical. What did it do right before it cut out? When did you last fuel up? Have you been running premium or regular? Did you hear anything before the electrical went? Was the idle rough before tonight, or did it start tonight? They answered her precisely, which she also appreciated. The fuel line on the Softail was clogged, not badly, but enough. She pulled it, cleared it, checked the fuel filter, replaced it. While she was at it, she found a loose connection on the primary coil that had been intermittently cutting the ignition, which explained the misfiring. 2 problems, not 1. The kind of compound failure that happened when machines were ridden hard for a long time and maintenance got pushed back because you were always 100 miles from the next stop. This one's been running rough for a while, she said, not as an accusation, just a statement of fact. Yeah, Ryder said. How long? He was quiet for a moment. Couple months, maybe. Couple months, Evelyn repeated and didn't say anything else about it. She moved to the second bike. This one was completely dead. A Road King, heavy and well-traveled, the chrome worn at the edges in ways that spoke of real use rather than showroom polish. She checked the battery first. It was holding charge, which meant the problem was elsewhere. She went through the ignition system methodically. Ryder followed her without being asked, holding the flashlight, passing her tools when she reached for them, because he'd learned her rhythm after the first bike. The other men watched. One of them, the one sitting backward on the folding chair. She'd heard another one call him Dozer, had started watching her hands, specifically the way her fingers moved through the system, testing each connection, reading the machine through touch the way a doctor reads a patient through palpation. You do this yourself, Dozer said, not a challenge, genuine curiosity. My husband and I, Evelyn said, without stopping what she was doing. He passed 11 years ago. Nobody said anything to that. They didn't offer condolences in the reflexive, uncomfortable way that people did at funerals. They just absorbed the information and were quiet with it, which was, Evelyn had found, the most honest response a person could have to someone else's grief. He teach you, Ryder said after a moment. We taught each other, she said. I was better with electrics. He was better with engines. We figured it out as we went. The problem with the Road King turned out to be a failed ignition module, the kind of failure that happened without warning and couldn't be predicted or prevented, just addressed when it happened. She had a replacement in inventory, an older model that wasn't a perfect match but would work, and she swapped it in with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this kind of improvised repair hundreds of times. The machine turned over on the 3rd try and settled into the low, even idle that meant it was running right. Ryder let out a breath through his nose. It was the most emotion she had seen him express. 2 down, she said. 4 to go, he said. I know how to count, she said, and moved to the next one. The rain outside intensified around 11 o'clock, which she knew because the sound on the metal roof changed character from steady percussion to something closer to sustained roar. The temperature dropped with it. The desert could do that without warning, go from a warm evening to something close to cold inside of an hour when the weather moved through. One of the bikers she hadn't formally met yet went to the door, looked at the sky for a long moment, and then came back inside and sat down without saying anything. She was working on the third bike, a fat boy with carburetor issues running rich and flooding on startup, when she heard the quiet conversation start up behind her. Not directed at her, just between the men keeping themselves occupied the way people did in waiting rooms and anywhere else that time needed filling. "She's fast," one of them said. The one she hadn't heard speak before leaned younger than the others, sitting on the workbench nearest the wall. "She knows what she's looking at," Ryder said. "Watch her hands." "What happened to this place?" another voice said. "Looks like it's been through it." 20 years of highway," Ryder said. "Same as us." Evelyn kept her hands moving and didn't acknowledge the conversation. She had learned a long time ago that people talked more honestly when they forgot you were listening. "You think she's going to ask us what we want," Dozer said. "She hasn't yet," Ryder said. "Doesn't seem the type." "No," Ryder agreed. "She doesn't." The carburetor on the Fat Boy was partially gummed old fuel residue from sitting, which told her the bike had been in storage at some point in the last year and hadn't been properly prepped when it came back out. She cleaned it as best she could with what she had on hand, adjusted the fuel-to-air mixture, cleared the flooding, and brought the engine back to life. It ran rough for the first 30 seconds and then smoothed out into something approaching reliable. She straightened up, put her hands on her lower back, and stretched. 68 years old and 4 hours into what was becoming an all-night job. Her back made its objection known in no uncertain terms. "You want coffee?" said the youngest one. He had gotten up at some point and found the small coffee maker on the side table, the one she kept out there for long winter nights, and apparently figured out how to use it without being asked. Evelyn looked at the coffee maker, then at him. "You know how much to put in." "I made a guess." "How much did you put in?" "Probably too much." "Probably," she agreed and poured a cup anyway. It was almost dense enough to chew, but it was hot, and hot was what mattered. She drank half of it, standing up, looking at the next 3 bikes, organizing the order of operations in her head. The 4th bike had a combination of issues. She found a cracked spark plug on the primary cylinder and a bad valve seal that was burning oil, which was why the exhaust had been that particular shade of blue-gray she'd clocked when they first pulled in. She did what she could with the spark plug, which was replaceable. The valve seal was a longer job, not a roadside fix, and she told Ryder exactly that. "How far are you going to make it?" she asked him. "Need to make it to Tucson," he said. She considered this. "You'll make it. You'll burn some oil. Check it every couple hours and add if it drops. Don't push it above 70. He nodded. He didn't ask why or question her assessment. He took the information and stored it. It was close to 1 in the morning when she reached the 5th bike, and her back had gone from objecting to simply suffering in resigned silence. One of the bikers had found Roy's old stool, the adjustable one, padded on top that Roy had used because his knees started going in his late 50s, and moved it close to where she was working. She didn't comment on it, but she sat on it while she worked the ignition system on the 5th bike, a Sportster's with a dead battery and a corroded ground connection that had been pulling amperage and slowly killing everything downstream. "My dad had a Sportster," said the lean younger one. He had drifted over and was standing nearby, not too close. 1987, he loved that thing. "They're good bikes," Evelyn said. "People underestimate them because they're smaller. They run forever if you take care of them." "He didn't take care of it," the kid said. "Passed it to me when I was 19. I didn't take care of it either." "What happened to it?" "It's in a field somewhere in New Mexico," he said. "I'd like to find it again someday." Evelyn replaced the battery terminal connection with a new fitting from inventory and cleaned the corrosion off the ground cable with a wire brush until the connection was clean metal against clean metal. The Sportster came back to life on the first turn. The kid smiled at it, a complicated smile, the kind that had old feeling under the new one. "Thank you," he said. Evelyn said, and moved to the last bike. The last one was the worst. A Dyna Wide Glide with a cracked stator, a major internal failure, the kind that could have stranded them permanently if it had gone the rest of the way. She found it by working through the electrical system from the outside and eliminating possibilities one at a time until only one remained. It explained everything: the battery that kept dying, the weird fluctuations in the dash lights that Ryder mentioned when she asked the strange stuttering in the headlight at highway speed. She sat back on the stool and looked at it. I can give you a workaround, she said. It's not a fix. The stator needs to be replaced. That's a shop job, full teardown, probably 6 hours at minimum. What I can do is wire around it directly to give you enough current to make the run without the battery dying on you. It'll hold if you don't push it. You'll lose highway charge, meaning you're using battery power without replenishing it. But if you're going to Tucson, you've got enough reserve to get there. Maybe a little extra. Ryder was quiet for a moment, processing the technical reality of what she was telling him. She could see him doing the math. That's your best option out here, he said. Unless you want to leave the bike, she said. I can hold it. You come back with the right parts in time. But if you need it to move tonight, that's the option. We need it to move tonight. Then let me work, she said. It took another 40 minutes. Bypassing a stator without shorting the system was delicate work, the kind that required patience and precision in equal measure, and didn't forgive half measures. She took her time and did it right, checking each connection twice before moving to the next, maintaining a running commentary in her head of what she was doing and why the same internal monologue she had developed over decades of working on machines that didn't speak but communicated in their own language if you knew how to listen. The wide glide started on the first try. She heard one of the bikers behind her say something low, and another answer, and then it was quiet again. Evelyn stood up, wiped her hands on the shop rag she had tucked into her waistband, and looked at Ryder. 6 bikes, she said. All 6 going. He was looking at her in a way she couldn't entirely categorize. Not like she'd done something remarkable. More like he was reevaluating a prior assumption, working out a new version of something he'd thought he already understood. What do we owe you, he said. Nothing, she said. He went still. Not the stillness of surprise exactly. The stillness of a man who had learned to read small gestures and was reading this one carefully. Ma'am, I didn't do it for pay, Evelyn said. She moved to the sink at the back of the garage and began washing the grease off her hands, scrubbing with the worn bar of shop soap that lived on the shelf above the basin. You were stranded in a storm. I had the tools and the knowledge to help. That's the whole transaction. That's not how it works, Ryder said. It is tonight, she said. She heard him exhale through his nose again. That almost expression that she was beginning to understand was as close as he got to visible feeling. She dried her hands on the shop towel and turned around. All 6 of them were looking at her. It was an odd moment. She was a 68-year-old woman in an old garage in the middle of a desert storm, covered in grease to the elbows, facing 6 large men in road-worn leather whose combined presence filled the space considerably. And every single one of them was looking at her with something she could only describe as unguarded attention. Not the calculating look she sometimes got from people who were trying to figure out what she wanted. Something more honest than that. You have somewhere to be tonight, Ryder said. I live here, Evelyn said. Then let me ask you something, he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a card. Plain white, just a name and a number. He held it out and she took it. If you ever need anything at all, you call that number. Evelyn looked at the card. She looked at him. I'm not going to need anything, she said. Maybe not, Ryder said. Keep it anyway. She put the card in her own pocket, not because she thought she'd use it, because refusing felt like a different kind of rudeness, and she had been raised not to be rude. The bikers moved back toward their machines. The storm was still going outside, but it had shifted character. The full violence had passed through, and what remained was steady rain, the kind that could last for hours, but didn't have the same malice behind it. Better riding weather, not good but manageable. Ryder stopped at the door and looked back at her. Your husband, he said. He taught you right. We taught each other. She said the same answer she'd given before. He nodded. Something crossed his face that she couldn't name, but it wasn't nothing. Then they were gone. 6 sets of taillights pulling out of her lot and back onto the dark highway, fading into the rain until there was nothing left of them but the sound, and then not even that. Evelyn stood in the open doorway for a moment. The garage smelled like rain and exhaust and oil and coffee. Roy's stool was still pulled out from where she'd been sitting. The coffee maker was still on. Somewhere in her lower back, the night's work had installed a deep muscular ache that was going to be worse in the morning. She let herself feel the quiet for just a moment. Then she went back and started cleaning up. She washed down the workbench. She put the tools back in order. Each one returned to its proper home, the system Roy had designed and she had maintained because good order was what made the work possible. She emptied the coffee grounds from the machine. She turned off the main lights and left only the small lamp on above the workbench, the one she used when she was doing late paperwork. She sat down at the old desk in the corner. Roy's desk, always Roy's desk, and she looked at the card Ryder had given her. Plain white, a name, a number, nothing else. She set it on the corner of the desk and looked at it for a long moment. Outside, the rain continued its steady conversation with the desert. Evelyn Harper turned off the lamp and went to bed. She slept well, which surprised her a little. The kind of sleep that comes from having done something useful, something complete, a job finished, a problem solved, strangers sent back into the world with working machines. She hadn't thought about what she got out of it. That wasn't how she'd been built, or maybe it was how Roy had built her. Or maybe they had built each other that way. Two people who had learned early in their marriage that the only answer to a hard world was to be useful in it and not keep score. She woke at 6 in the morning at a pale desert light and the sound of a cactus wren somewhere close to the window. She made coffee, real coffee, not the concentrated engine fuel from the night before, and she stood at the kitchen window and watched the morning come in. The storm had cleaned everything. The sky was the particular shade of blue that only existed after a hard desert rain, a color with no adequate name in English, something between cerulean and absolute. She drank her coffee. She thought about the day ahead, the F-250 still under the lift, 3 other scheduled jobs she needed to get to by afternoon. She did not think about the bikers except in the idle way you think about something that has passed through your life and moved on. She did not think about the card on her desk. Not yet. The first letter arrived 4 days later. Evelyn was at the workbench when she heard the mail truck, and she didn't get up immediately. She wasn't expecting anything. She rarely got personal mail. Most communication happened by phone or email when it happened at all, and most of her business correspondence she handled digitally, now a concession she had made with difficulty 5 years ago when Roy's paper-based accounting system had finally collapsed under its own inadequacy. She got up at noon when she went inside for lunch and found the mail on the small table by the front door where she always left it. The envelope from the Maricopa County Tax Authority sat on top. The letter inside informed her that she had an outstanding tax debt of $31,240 arising from a reassessment of property valuations for the current fiscal year, combined with corrections to prior year filings. Payment was expected within 60 days. Failure to respond would result in a lien placed against the property. Evelyn read it twice. Then she put it down on the kitchen table and sat very still for a moment. $31,000. The number sat in her chest like a stone. She made a decent living. The garage kept the lights on, kept her in groceries, kept the equipment serviced. But $31,000 was not a number she could produce from operational income. Not in 60 days, not without selling something. And what she would sell, she didn't know because everything she had was either the garage or the house, and those were the same thing. She picked up the phone and called the county tax office. The woman who answered was professionally pleasant in the practice way of someone who handled upset callers all day and had built defenses accordingly. She confirmed the amount. She confirmed the deadline. She explained that the reassessment was standard procedure and that if Evelyn believed there was an error, she could file an appeal which would take between 6 and 9 months to process, during which time the debt would remain active and the lien could still be imposed if payment was not received. 6 to 9 months, Evelyn said. That's the standard timeline. The woman said, "Can I speak to a supervisor?" The supervisor took longer to come to the phone and told her the same things in a slightly more formal register. Evelyn hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she went back to work, because that was what you did. The F-250 still needed its exhaust system finished. The afternoon jobs were waiting. The world didn't pause because the county had decided to reach into your life and take something. She worked until 7 and then went inside and called her accountant, Dan Pfeiffer, who had done her taxes for the last 14 years. Dan looked at the number she read to him over the phone and was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "I filed your taxes. I have copies of everything. You don't owe that amount. You've been current every year." "Then why does the county say I do?" "I don't know," he said. "Something's wrong. I'll pull everything Monday and call the assessor's office directly." They said an appeal takes 6 to 9 months. Dan was quiet again. Yeah, he said. They say that. Let me make some calls. Don't panic yet. Don't panic yet. She sat with those words after she hung up and wondered what the threshold for panic was supposed to be. She didn't panic. She was 68 years old and had lost her husband, had run a business alone for 11 years, had replaced 3 engines by herself in the Arizona summer when the thermometer hit 108 in the shade. She was not a person who panicked easily, but she lay awake that night for the first time in a long time, staring at the ceiling, running numbers that didn't add up. The second blow came a week later. A man appeared at their garage on a Tuesday morning. Not a customer, something about the way he held himself made that clear immediately. He was in his 40s, good suit, careful hair, the kind of person who did not spend much time in garages and was aware of it. He introduced himself as a representative of Consolidated Land Partners, LLC, and handed her a document. The document was a property claim. It referenced an original deed from 1987 before she and Roy had purchased the land, asserting that a prior owner had sold a portion of the property to a predecessor company, and that through a chain of transfers, Consolidated Land Partners had acquired that original claim, which superseded her title. She read it twice, standing in the middle of the garage while the man in the suit stood slightly too far away to be polite and slightly too close to be gone. This is not possible, she said. My husband and I bought this land in 1998. There was a clear title search. Nothing like this existed. That may be your experience, the man said. However, there is no however, she said. I have the original purchase documents. I have the title insurance. I have 26 years of property tax payments on this specific parcel. The company would be willing to discuss a settlement arrangement, the man said. I think you'd find it quite reasonable. Get off my property, Evelyn said. The man left. Evelyn went inside and called Dan Pfeiffer again. Then she called the county recorder's office. Then she called a property attorney in Tucson, a woman named Sandra Okafor, whom Dan recommended, and who, when Evelyn reached her late that afternoon, listened carefully and then said something that landed in Evelyn's chest like cold water. This kind of manufactured claim is very specific, Sandra said. Someone had to file it. Someone had to create the paperwork. That's not something that happens accidentally. Do you know anyone who has an interest in acquiring your property? Evelyn thought about it. There had been an offer she remembered, about 8 months ago, a letter from a development company offering to purchase the property at what they called a fair market assessment. She had thrown it away without responding. She hadn't thought much about it. The property wasn't for sale, so there was nothing to respond to. There was an offer I didn't respond to, she said, about 8 months back. What company? She didn't remember the name. She had thrown the letter away. Think about it, Sandra said. The name might matter. Evelyn thought about it for 3 days. The name came to her at 4 a.m. on the third day, one of those midnight retrievals that the sleeping brain performed when the waking brain had failed Crane Development Group. She remembered because she'd thought at the time that it was an unusual name for a company, slightly predatory in a way that had amused her without alarming her. She called Sandra with the name. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then, I know that name. Victor Crane. He's been buying up rural property across the county for about 3 years, mostly distressed sellers. I'm not a distressed seller, Evelyn said. No, Sandra said, but if a tax debt shows up and then a property claim shows up, the logic assembled itself in Evelyn's head before Sandra finished the sentence. He was making her distressed. She sat with that realization, the sheer deliberate coldness of it, and felt something she hadn't expected, not fear, something closer to rage. The quiet kind, the kind that didn't shout or scatter but settled in at the bottom of everything and stayed. She got up. She went to her filing cabinet. She pulled the original purchase documents for the property, the deed, the title search, the insurance policy, 26 years of tax payment receipts, every piece of paper she had ever generated in connection with this land, and spread them across Roy's desk. She was going to fight this. She just didn't know yet how completely alone she would have to do it, or how far Victor Crane's reach had already extended into the system that was supposed to protect her. And she didn't know that somewhere in Tucson, Ryder was still thinking about an old woman in a desert garage who had fixed his entire crew for free in the middle of a storm and refused to take $1 for it. Some things get remembered, the right things sometimes, but that was still ahead of her. For now, she had documents spread across the dead man's desk, a phone number she hadn't called yet, and 40 years of stubbornness that had kept her standing through everything else life had dropped on her without apology or warning. She would need all of it. The documents spread across Roy's desk didn't lie. Evelyn knew that with the certainty of someone who had organized that filing cabinet herself, who had filed every receipt, every payment confirmation, every tax return, with the same precision she applied to engine work, methodically, completely, without gaps. She had learned early in life that paper was armor. You kept records because someday someone would tell you that something hadn't happened, and the only answer to that lie was a piece of paper with a date and a signature on it. She had the paper, all of it, 26 years of it. What she didn't have was someone willing to look at it. Sandra Okafor called back Monday morning with the results of her weekend research, and her voice had the careful flatness of a professional delivering news she knew would land badly. "I found the filing," she said. "The property claim. Someone submitted it to the county recorder 6 weeks ago. The document references a 1987 deed from a company called Desert Basin Holdings. The problem is that deed is real. It exists in the county records. Whether it applies to your parcel the way they're claiming is a different question, and that's the question we'd have to litigate." "Litigate?" Evelyn repeated. "Yes. How long, madame? If we file immediately, get on the docket push for an expedited hearing, minimum 8 months. Realistically, a year. Maybe more, depending on how many continuances they request." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "And while that's happening, the claim stays on title, which means you can't refinance, can't sell, can't borrow against the property. The tax debt is separate. That's a parallel track. If that goes to lien before we resolve the property claim, things get significantly more complicated." "More complicated," Evelyn said, and the phrase tasted like something rotten. "I want to be honest with you," Sandra said. "What I'm seeing looks coordinated. The timing of the tax reassessment against the timing of the property filing, those aren't coincidental. Someone is running a strategy." "Victor Crane," Evelyn said. "I can't prove that yet," Sandra said. "But yes, that's my read." Evelyn looked at Roy's desk, at the neat stacks of documents she'd organized the night before, labeled indexed, ready to be used. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Everything you have. Bring it in. We build the case from the ground up." She drove to Tucson that afternoon with a banker's box of documents in the back seat. Sandra's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and the woman herself was exactly what her voice had suggested: methodical, direct, unimpressed by drama, and very interested in facts. She went through Evelyn's materials with the speed of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for, making notes in a legal pad with a mechanical pencil, occasionally pulling a document from the stack and setting it aside in a separate pile. "This is good," Sandra said near the end. "Your documentation is excellent. The chain of title is clear. The original purchase, the title insurance, the continuous tax payments. This is the kind of record that wins." "Then why does it feel like I'm losing?" Evelyn said. Sandra looked at her directly. "Because winning on the merits and winning in the timeline are two different things. What you have here proves you're right, but proving you're right takes time, and time is what they're using against you." The drive back was 90 minutes, and Evelyn spent most of it with the radio off, thinking. She had always been a practical woman, not cold, but practical, the kind of person who responded to problems by identifying what could be done rather than fixating on what couldn't be changed. It had served her well. It had gotten her through Roy's death, through 11 years of solo business operation, through 2 recessions and 1 drought, and a summer when the air conditioning in the garage failed and she worked in 102 degrees for 3 weeks because she couldn't afford the repair until the following month. But this felt different. This felt like someone had designed a system specifically to exhaust her, because that was exactly what it was. She understood that now with a clarity that was almost impersonal, almost academic, in the way that understanding an engine failure was academic even when the failure had stranded you on the side of a highway. Victor Crane wasn't trying to beat her in court. He was trying to tire her out before she ever got there. The tax debt, the property claim, the manufactured paperwork, each one was a separate front, requiring a separate fight, drawing on the same finite resources. 68 years old alone, limited funds, limited energy. The math wasn't complicated. She got home at 6, fed the cat she didn't usually admit to having, and sat at Roy's desk with a notepad. At the top, she wrote what I can control. Below that, my documentation, my attorney, my accountant. Below that, my ability to stay. She looked at the last item for a long time. Then she got up and made dinner and went to bed. The inspectors arrived on Thursday. Two of them from the County Code Enforcement Office showing up without prior appointment at 8:15 in the morning when she was under a Chevy Silverado with her head inside the wheel well. She heard unfamiliar footsteps on the garage floor and slid out to find two men in county-issued vests with clipboards looking around the space with the practiced neutrality of people conducting an official process. "Evelyn Harper," the taller one said. "That's me. We're here to conduct a compliance inspection of the commercial property." He showed her a form. Routine. Nothing about this was routine and they all knew it, but she stood aside and let them work because there was no legal basis to refuse them, and she understood that refusing would be interpreted as obstruction and used against her. They moved through the garage methodically. They measured distances. They photographed equipment, storage areas, electrical panels. They consulted their clipboards and made notes in low voices. Evelyn followed them without hovering, watching without making it obvious she was watching, noting everything they stopped at and everything they photographed. They were in the garage for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When they finished, the taller one handed her a preliminary notice. 7 violations listed in formal regulatory language. Insufficient fire suppression coverage in the storage area. Electrical panel configuration out of current code. Overhead clearance variance in Section B. Drainage noncompliance. 3 others. Evelyn read through the list twice. "These things weren't violations last year," she said. "The county inspected this property 18 months ago. I have the certificate of compliance." "Code requirements are updated periodically," the man said. "Current standards apply." "When were these standards updated?" He looked at his clipboard. "Various dates." "Give me the specific dates and ordinance numbers," she said. He wrote them down for her without argument, which told her he had expected the question and was prepared for it. That itself was information. Prepared answers meant rehearsed process, and rehearsed process meant this had been planned. "How long do I have to address these?" she said. 30 days for preliminary compliance. Failure to achieve compliance within that period may result in suspension of operating license. She took the notice and she nodded and she thanked them because whatever was happening, she was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shaken, and she stood in the doorway and watched them walk back to their county vehicle and drive away. Then she went back inside and called Dan Pfeiffer. "Dan," she said when he picked up, "I need you to pull the updated code ordinances for commercial automotive operations in this county. I need the dates each requirement was adopted, and I need to know if there were any unusual frequency of updates in the last 12 months. Dan was quiet for a beat. "What's happening, Evelyn?" "Someone is changing the rules of the game," she said. "I need to know exactly when the rules changed and whether the timing is convenient." He called her back 4 hours later. His voice had a different quality to it, careful in the way that people became careful when information turned out to be more significant than expected. "The 7 violations they cited you for," he said, 4 of them reference ordinances that were updated in the last 14 months. 3 of those 4 were updated within the last 6 months. "How unusual is that?" she said. In the prior decade, Dan said commercial automotive code in this county was updated twice. In the last 14 months, it has been updated 6 times. Evelyn sat with that number, 6 times in 14 months versus twice in 10 years. She was not a conspiracy theorist. She had lived long enough to know that most bad outcomes were the product of negligence rather than malice, accident rather than design. But you could also live long enough to recognize the shape of deliberate action. "Who sits on the county code review board?" she said. "I can find out." "Do that," she said. He called back the next morning with 2 names on the code review board that were also listed as principals in subsidiary companies connected to Crane Development Group. Not directly, there were layers of LLC structure between them, but the connection existed. Evelyn wrote the names down in her notepad under "What I can prove." The list was short, but it was starting. She spent the next 2 weeks running on parallel tracks, the way she'd learned to run the garage during Roy's illness. Multiple things happening simultaneously, priorities shifting, fatigue, accumulating, but being managed rather than indulged. She filed paperwork with the county appealing the tax assessment. She worked with Sandra on the property claim response. She researched the code update ordinances and compiled evidence of their timing. She kept the garage open and running because the income from the garage was what was funding all of this. And if the garage went down, everything else went down with it. She slept poorly. She ate adequately. She kept working. The call from Tom Briggs came on a Wednesday afternoon. Tom was her neighbor, not close in distance. Nothing was close out here, but close, in the way that desert people understood neighbors. The person you called. If something went wrong, the person who watched your property when you traveled, the person whose truck you recognized at a distance and whose wave out the window meant a specific and familiar thing. Tom was 71, a retired electrician, stubbornly self-sufficient in ways that made Evelyn feel they had chosen similar philosophies for their lives. "Had a man stop by my place this morning," Tom said. "Nice car, nice suit, asking questions about your property." Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of questions?" "History, whether I knew how long you'd been there, whether I'd ever heard of any disputes over the landlines." Tom paused. "I told him I'd been your neighbor for 19 years and I'd never heard of any such thing. He thanked me very politely and got back in his car." "What company did he say he was from?" "He didn't," Tom said. "Just said he was doing background research for a client. Real estate matter was all he said." After she hung up, Evelyn sat very still. They were now talking to her neighbors. Building a picture. Building a case from the outside in the same way she built a diagnosis on an engine, not from the symptom alone, but from every piece of context surrounding it. The difference was that an engine didn't fight back. The engine didn't know it was being taken apart. She called Sandra and told her about Tom's visitor. Sandra listened and then said, "They're looking for gaps. Anything in the history of the property they can use to complicate your title. A fence line dispute, a question about access rights, anything that creates ambiguity. Don't panic, but talk to your neighbors. Anyone who's had regular contact with your property, anyone who might have information relevant to its history, get their statements documented." "How many people?" Evelyn said. "Everyone," Sandra said. "Everyone who's known you out there." Evelyn spent the following Saturday driving her routes. 7 neighbors within a 10-mile radius who'd had any meaningful contact with her or Roy's property over the years. She sat in their kitchens and on their porches, and she explained what was happening as clearly and factually as she could, and she asked them each the same questions. Had they ever been approached about her property? Had they noticed anything unusual? Did they have any recollection of historical disputes or access issues? The answers were uniformly the same: no, no, and no. What she got instead was something she hadn't fully anticipated. Anger on her behalf, the particular slow-burning desert anger of people who had chosen a remote life specifically to be left alone, and who took the violation of that chosen peace as a personal affront. Tom Briggs drove me over that same evening with a full file of property records he'd been keeping since 1978, when he'd first bought his land, which overlapped with some of Evelyn's boundary lines and documented clearly that there had never been a dispute. "You use whatever you need," he said, dropping the file on Roy's desk. "I've got copies." "Tom, don't thank me," he said. "Just fight this thing." The next blow came from a direction she hadn't been watching. She had been so focused on the legal fronts, the tax appeal, the property claim, the code violations, that she had not been watching the physical space, the garage itself, Roy's place. She came in early on a Monday morning to find the padlock on the storage unit at the back of the property had been cut. Not broken, cut cleanly with bolt cutters and replaced with a different padlock, as if someone had been inside and then reclosed the space afterward to delay discovery. She stood outside the storage unit for a moment, processing what she was seeing. Then she opened it. She had a spare key to her own padlock, and the different lock meant she had to cut it off herself, which she did with the bolt cutters from the garage methodically without rushing. Inside the storage unit, everything looked the same at first. Shelving boxes, old equipment, the spare parts inventory she'd been building for 20 years. Most of it, Roy's accumulation, organized and cataloged in the system they'd built together. She went through it carefully and found what was missing. The original deed to the property, the one she'd had in a fire-safe box at the back of the storage unit, the one document she hadn't brought to Sandra because it was the original, the irreplaceable one, and she had considered the storage unit more secure than the house. Gone. The fire-safe box was still there. It had been opened. She could see the scratches around the lock where someone had forced it, and the deed was not inside it. She stood in the storage unit for a long time. The rage was there, but it was cold now. Below everything, below the practical thinking that immediately occupied the surface of her mind. Call Sandra. Call Dan. Call the sheriff document. This photograph, everything, file a police report. Do it in the right order. Don't contaminate the scene. Think, she thought. She photographed everything with her phone. She called the sheriff's department and stayed outside while she waited, not going back into the storage unit. The deputy who came was young mid-20s professional, but clearly limited in what he could do with what she was showing him. He filed the report. He took her statement. He told her that without clear evidence of a specific perpetrator, the investigation would be limited. I know who did this, Evelyn said. Ma'am, do you have evidence linking? I know who did this, she said again, not raising her voice. I just don't have evidence yet. He filed the report. He left. She called Sandra. Sandra's response was immediate and precise. This is an escalation, physical intrusion theft of a critical document. This isn't just paperwork anymore. File the police report, which you've done. I'm going to file an emergency motion for evidence preservation in the property case. And Evelyn, be careful. I mean that practically. Change your locks tonight. All of them. She changed the locks that evening. She drove to the hardware store in town and bought new deadbolts for the house and a heavy-duty padlock for the storage unit, the kind with a hardened shackle that required a grinder rather than bolt cutters. She installed them herself, which took 2 hours, and reminded her back of every similar indignity from the past 3 weeks. She was installing the last deadbolt on the back door of the house when she heard gravel under tires in the driveway. Not a customer. She knew immediately from the sound, too slow, too deliberate, not the speed of someone approaching for service. She set down the screwdriver and walked around the corner of the house. The car was a dark SUV, high-end clean. The man who got out was in his 50s, heavy-set but carrying it well, the kind of physical presence that came from size managed rather than neglected. He wore clothes that were expensive in ways designed not to look expensive, the kind of wealth that had learned to disguise itself as ordinary. He had a face that had probably been charming once and had settled into something harder, the charm still visible underneath like a structure beneath plaster. He smiled at her. She didn't smile back. Ms. Harper, he said, my name is Victor Crane. I apologize for coming without calling ahead. She looked at him for a moment. The man behind the tax debt and the false property claim and the code violations and the stolen deeds stood in her driveway, and he was smiling. What do you want? She said. I want to talk, he said. Directly, person to person, without the attorneys. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness that she read as practiced. I think we've both been dealing with a lot of unnecessary complexity. You created the complexity, she said. Something moved in his face. Not shame. Victor Crane did not look like a man who experienced shame. It was closer to recalculation, a brief adjustment for the fact that she was going to be direct rather than uncertain. I'm a developer, he said. I buy land. Sometimes the process is messy. I'm here because I'd rather make it clean. You broke into my storage unit, she said. And then, I don't know what you're referring to, he said, and his voice was flat in a way that was almost convincing. You stole my original deed. Ms. Harper, I'm here to offer you a fair price for this property. A very fair price. Enough to let you start over somewhere better than this, honestly. A new shop, a new house. You've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to not have to fight for it. She looked at him. She took her time looking at him, the same way she took her time with a machine she was diagnosing, not rushing, reading everything available before drawing conclusions. Mr. Crane, she said, Roy and I built this property. We put 30 years into this land. Our marriage is in this ground. My husband is buried in the county cemetery 8 miles from here, and I drive past it every time I go to town. She paused. There is no price. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. The charm closed over like a shutter. That's a decision you'll regret, he said quietly, and it wasn't quite a threat, but it was exactly what a threat sounded like when said by someone careful enough not to say it directly. Get off my property, she said. He got back in the SUV. He drove away without looking back. Evelyn stood in the driveway until the sound of the engine faded, and then she stood there a little longer. She went back inside and finished installing the deadbolt. Then she sat at Roy's desk, and she looked at the card on the corner. Rider's card, plain white name and number, the thing she had put down 3 weeks ago and not touched since. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. She had managed so far by herself. She had documentation, an attorney, an accountant, neighbors willing to help. She had filed her appeals and her police report and her evidence preservation motion. She had done everything right, and Victor Crane had walked into her driveway and told her politely and without raising his voice that none of it was going to matter. Because the system that was supposed to protect her had already been partially arranged to work against her. The tax authority, the code board, the property records, these were the tools she was supposed to fight with, and Crane had already touched them. She thought about what Sandra had said. Someone is running a strategy. She thought about what Dan had said. 6 code updates in 14 months. She thought about the deputy, young and professionally limited, filing his report and leaving. She thought about Victor Crane's face when she'd said no, that closing over, that shutter coming down. She put the card on the desk in front of her. She didn't reach for the phone immediately. She sat there for a while longer because she was not a person who made decisions quickly when the decision was significant. She thought about what it meant to make that call, what it said about everything she'd tried to do alone, whether accepting help was the same as admitting defeat, and she decided slowly, honestly, sitting in Roy's chair at Roy's desk, with Roy's tools quiet on the walls around her, that it was not. Accepting help was not defeat. Roy had taught her that. They had taught each other that. 2 people who'd figured it out together, neither of them alone. She picked up the phone. She dialed. It rang 4 times, and she was preparing for voicemail, organizing in her head what she would say when the line opened. "Yeah," Ryder said. One word, but she recognized the voice immediately, the same economical register, the same quality of attention underneath it. "This is Evelyn Harper," she said. "Arizona, the garage." There was a brief silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't remember. The silence of someone who was already paying full attention. "I remember," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Some things have happened. I thought I could handle it by myself, and I'm not sure anymore." "Tell me," he said. And she did. She told him all of it, the tax letter, the property claim, the inspectors, the code violations, Tom's visitor, the stolen deed, Victor Crane in her driveway. She told it in order, chronologically, factually, the way she would have told it to Sandra or Dan, without pleading, without dramatics, because she was not built for dramatics, and this was serious enough that it didn't need embellishment. The facts were sufficient. Ryder listened. She talked for 20 minutes, and he didn't interrupt once. She was aware of that, the specific quality of his listening, the lack of interjections, in the absence of the discomfort that people showed when a story ran long. He just listened completely the way you listened when you understood that every detail might matter. When she finished, there was a pause. "This Crane," he said, "he came to your door personally yesterday evening, and he told you it was a decision you'd regret." "He said I'd regret it." "Yes." Another pause. Shorter. "Don't touch the appeals, don't touch the legal stuff. Keep all of that going. But don't make any more moves on your own. Don't talk to anyone from his side. Don't let anyone onto the property without a reason you've confirmed yourself." "All right," she said. "And Evelyn," he said, and the use of her first name the first time he'd used it had a weight to it that she felt without being able to explain it. "You fixed 6 of our bikes in a storm, and you didn't ask for a thing. That's not something that gets forgotten." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Soon." He hung up. She set the phone down on Roy's desk and looked at the wall of tools, wrenches, and sockets organized by size, the system she had maintained for 22 years, the physical record of a life built from useful things. She didn't know what Ryder meant by soon. She didn't know what he meant by "we'll handle it exactly," or what handling it looked like from the other side of that phone call. She knew only 2 things with any certainty: that she had told the truth to someone who had listened to all of it, and that the act of telling it had released something. Some tension she'd been carrying in her chest since the first letter arrived, that she hadn't known was there until it was gone. She was still alone in the house. Victor Crane's network was still in place. The legal fights were still running. The deed was still missing. But something had shifted. Something that didn't have a name yet, but that felt in the way that a properly set engine felt, aligned, intentioned, correctly ready to run. She got up, she made coffee, she went back to work. 2 days later, at 3 in the morning, her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize. 3 words were on it. She read it once. She set the phone down. She went back to sleep, and this time she slept without interruption all the way to morning. 3 words on a phone screen at 3 in the morning and then silence. We're on it. Evelyn had stared at those words for maybe 10 seconds before setting the phone face down on the nightstand and closing her eyes. She didn't know who had sent them. She didn't know what being on it meant in practical terms, or what it would look like when it arrived, or whether it would arrive in time. What she knew was that she had made the call, told the truth, and been heard. That was the part she could control. The rest would move at whatever speed it moved. She slept. In the morning, the text was still there, and the situation was still the same. The appeals pending, the code violations on the 30-day clock. The missing deed, the lien threat still accumulating interest in the background like a slow fire nobody could see yet. She made coffee, she fed the cat. She went to the garage and opened the doors at 7:30, the same as she did every morning, because the work was the one thing that hadn't been taken from her, and she intended to keep it that way. The F-250 she'd been working on for 3 weeks was finally done. She called the owner, a rancher named Bud, who drove the truck hard and maintained it barely, and he came and picked it up that afternoon, and when he handed her the check, she held it for a moment longer than usual, thinking about what it represented. $640, $640 against $31,240. Against legal fees that were already climbing past $4,000. Against the cost of the new locks, the bolt cutters, the hardware store run the gas to Tucson and back. She deposited the check and didn't do the math out loud. Doing the math out loud was how people frightened themselves into paralysis. The second week after her call to Ryder was quiet in a way that had 2 different meanings. On the surface, it was quiet because nothing new had happened. No more letters, no new inspectors, no additional claims. But underneath that quiet was a different quality, the kind that Evelyn associated with the pause before an engine made a critical decision about whether it was going to start or not. A loaded silence, something gathering. She noticed it first in small things. A car that passed her driveway twice in one afternoon, not stopping, just passing slowly. A call from an unknown number that rang twice and disconnected when she answered. A man she didn't recognize sitting in the parking lot of the gas station in town when she stopped for fuel, not doing anything in particular, just sitting, but watching her car pull in with an attention that wasn't casual. She noted all of it. She called Sandra and described each incident in detail. Sandra said document everything, dates and times, any plates you can read. She did. She also called Ryder. He answered on the second ring this time. She described the car, the calls, the man at the gas station. Ryder listened and then said something she hadn't expected. Good, he said. Good, she said. It means they know something has changed, he said. They're watching because they're trying to figure out what's coming. That's different from when they were moving freely. You rattled something. I rattled something, she said, and wasn't sure whether that was reassuring or alarming. Both, Ryder said, as if he'd heard the unspoken second half of the thought. Means we're doing it right. She didn't ask what we were doing exactly, partly because she had learned in the 2 weeks since the call that Ryder communicated in the direction of facts rather than plans, telling her what had happened or what to do rather than what was coming. Partly because she had decided to trust the process, which was a decision she had made consciously in the same deliberate way she made all significant decisions, and having made it, she was going to honor it without second-guessing at every turn. But she was curious. She was a mechanic. She wanted to know how the engine worked. The answer started coming through Dan Pfeiffer. Dan called her on a Thursday morning with the voice of a man who had found something he wasn't sure how to explain. I have a question for you, he said, and I want you to hear it before you react. Skid, she said. Did you hire anyone to look into the county code board? She went still. No, she said. Someone is looking into it, Dan said. I know because a colleague of mine works in county government compliance side called me yesterday to ask if I knew anything about an outside investigation into the code review board. Apparently someone has been requesting records. A lot of records. Funding sources, vendor relationships, meeting minutes going back 3 years. Very specific, very comprehensive. My colleague wanted to know if it was connected to my client. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? She said. I said I didn't know, Dan said, which was true. He paused. Is it connected to you, Evelyn? She thought about Ryder, about 3 words on a phone at 3 in the morning. About we're on it. I don't know specifically, she said, but I think someone is helping me. Someone with resources, Dan said carefully. Yes. Another pause. She could hear him processing it, fitting it into a frame that made sense. All right, he said finally. I'll keep you posted on what I hear from that side. Thank you, Dan. Evelyn, he said, and then stopped. What? Whatever's happening, don't stop it. What I'm seeing in those code board records, the funding connections I've started pulling, there's something there. Someone should have looked at this a long time ago. She put the phone down and sat with the information for a while. Someone was pulling records, comprehensive records, multiple tracks going back years. The kind of investigation that required time and access and the specific knowledge of where to look and what to ask for. That wasn't something that happened casually, and it wasn't something she had set in motion herself. The scale of it was outside anything she could have done alone, and the fact that it was already moving, already far enough along that county employees were calling her accountant to ask about it, meant it had started immediately after her call to Ryder. 20 minutes after she told him her story. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that 6 bikers she'd helped for free in a rainstorm had produced within 2 weeks of a single phone call what appeared to be a multi-track investigation into the infrastructure of Victor Crane's strategy. She thought about what Roy would have said, and she could almost hear him, that dry, quiet humor he'd had, the way he delivered the most significant observations in the most understated register. He would have said, well, Ev, turns out you were fixing more than the bikes. She almost smiled. The garage was slow that week, which gave her time to work on the things Sandra needed. Additional documentation, sworn statements from her neighbors that Sandra was compiling into a formal response to the property claim. Tom Briggs had given her 8 pages of property history. A woman named Carol Reeves, who'd owned the adjacent parcel to the south since 1994, had signed a statement attesting to 29 years of observing Evelyn and Roy's continuous and undisputed occupation of the property. An elderly man named Pete Galvez, who'd worked as a surveyor in the county for 30 years before retiring, had reviewed the original deed description and confirmed in writing that the boundaries were unambiguous and that he had never encountered a competing claim in his professional work anywhere near this parcel. Sandra called it the best paper fortress I've seen outside of a major real estate litigation. Paper fortress, Evelyn said. You're going to need it, Sandra said, because they filed a motion this morning to accelerate the property claim to a hearing. Evelyn frowned. Accelerate? I thought they wanted delays. So did I, Sandra said. This is new. Something changed their calculation. What would make them want to go faster? Sandra was quiet for a moment. Pressure from another direction, she said. If something else is threatening the play, sometimes you try to lock in the legal position before it collapses. Another pause. Evelyn, is something happening that I should know about? Yes, Evelyn said, but I don't have specifics yet. Get me specifics when you can, Sandra said. In the meantime, the motion to accelerate actually helps us. We're ready. They may not be as ready as they think. The call ended, and Evelyn went back to the garage. She was pulling heads off a Dodge Ram's engine when her phone buzzed with a text from Ryder. Can you talk now is good. She wiped her hands and calls him. He answered immediately. You doing okay? He said. And the directness of the question, not how are things or just checking in, but you doing okay, personal and specific, made her pause for a second. I'm managing, she said. Something happened today. The other side filed to accelerate the property hearing. My attorney thinks it's because pressure is coming from somewhere else. It is, Ryder said. From you, she said. Not a question. From a few directions, he said. I want to tell you some things. Not everything yet, but some things. Tell me. She heard him shift, adjust the sound of someone settling into a longer conversation. A man named Marcus Webb, he said. He used to work for Crane Development Group, a Premium Group, finance side. He left the company about 18 months ago. He's been talking to people, not publicly, but quietly, in the way people talk when they want to say something and haven't found the right ear yet. We found his ear. What does he know? Evelyn said. Enough, Ryder said. He knows the process, how Crane identifies targets, how the legal strategy gets assembled, who the contacts are inside the county system that make the code board thing work. He's not willing to go on record yet, but he's close. What does close mean? It means we're having a conversation with him, Ryder said. It means people he trusts are having a conversation with him. It takes time. She absorbed this. What else? The forged deed, Ryder said. The one in the property claimed the 1987 document. Someone ran it through a document analysis process, not official but thorough. The paper stock dates to between 1997 and 2003. The ink composition is consistent with laser printing technology that didn't exist in 1987. The document is manufactured. Evelyn felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was clenched. Can that be proven in court? Not yet with what we have, Ryder said. The analysis we did isn't admissible, but it tells us what to look for. A forensic document examiner with court credentials would find the same things. The question is getting one retained and getting the document in front of them through the right channel. Sandra can do that, Evelyn said, if she knows what to look for. Tell her to look, Ryder said. Tell her you have reason to believe the document is fabricated and give her the physical indicators, paper dating, and ink composition. Let her run it properly. How do I explain where the information came from? You tell her it came from a source that did a preliminary review, Ryder said. Which is the truth. She called Sandra within the hour. Sandra's response to the information about the document analysis was the controlled excitement of a lawyer who had just been handed the key to a locked room. If that analysis is right, she said, we don't just win the property case. We create a basis for criminal referral. Document fraud in a real property proceeding is a felony. Good, Evelyn said. I'll retain a forensic document examiner by the end of the week, Sandra said. Evelyn, where did this information come from? A source I trust, Evelyn said. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, I'll work with what I have. The call with Sandra had lasted 20 minutes, and when it ended, Evelyn went back to the Dodge Ram's engine, which was waiting with the patience of a machine that had no capacity for impatience. She pulled the head gasket blown as she'd suspected the failure visible in the carbon tracking between cylinders and set it aside and began the cleanup work. She was halfway through it when the garage phone rang. The landline, the one she kept for business, calls the number on the sign out front. She answered it without thinking, wiping her hand on the shop rag as she picked up. Miss Harper. Not a question. Yin, Gran. The voice was male flat, deliberately unremarkable in the way voices became when their owners wanted to convey neither friendliness nor threat. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Crane. He wanted me to let you know that he's aware you've been speaking to outside parties about your situation. Evelyn said nothing. He wanted to convey, the voice continued, that this will complicate things unnecessarily. For you. Is that the message? Evelyn said. He also wanted to say that his offer remains open. The timeline on it, however, is not indefinite. Tell Mr. Crane, Evelyn said, that I'm in the middle of a job, and tell him that if he has something to say to me, he knows where I live, and he can come say it to my face the way he did last time instead of sending a phone call. She hung up. She stood beside the Dodge Ram for a moment, aware that her hands had gone entirely still. Not from fear, from the particular focus that settled over her when she understood that something important was happening and that her response to it would matter. Crane knew she'd made contact with outside parties. He knew it fast enough that someone had been watching, or someone had talked, or the investigation that Ryder's people had begun was visible enough that Crane's own network had registered it. Either way, he was no longer certain of his position. The call wasn't a threat so much as a probe testing what she would do, seeing if she'd flinch, measuring whether the pressure was enough to break the new alignment. She picked up her phone and called Ryder. He called, she said when Ryder picked up. Crane. Someone calling for him. Told me he knows I've been talking to outside parties. Told me his offer is still open, but the timeline isn't indefinite. Ryder was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted because the quality of his silences had become something she read. Good one, he said. You keep saying that, she said. Because it keeps being true, he said. He's reactive now. He was proactive when he was moving against you and you were just defending. Now he's watching and responding. That's different and that's weaker. He's still dangerous, she said. Yes, Ryder said, without any false reassurance which she appreciated more than comfort would have been. He's still dangerous. Don't change your habits. Don't let anyone on the property you don't know. And don't answer that landline after dark. All right, there's something else, Ryder said. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it without arguing. Tell me. People are coming, he said. Not just me. People who heard what happened. They're not coming to the property yet. That's not the time. Not while the legal situation is still running. But they want to. That's what I need you to understand. The call you made wasn't just to me, it moved through people. The story of what you did that night with our bikes for nothing in the rain, that story moved. Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment. How many people? She said finally. I don't have a final number, he said. Enough. She sat down on the stool. Not because she was overwhelmed, she was past overwhelmed, had processed through that stage weeks ago. She sat because what he was saying required her full attention, and she gave her full attention better when she was still. I don't want anyone getting into trouble for me, she said. Nobody's getting into trouble, Ryder said. What's being done is legal. The record pulls, the document analysis, the people talking to Marcus Webb, all legal. And what comes after when the time is right, that's legal too. I want you to understand that. This isn't going to be handled in a way that makes your situation worse. I trust you, she said, and was mildly surprised to find that she meant it completely. I know, he said. Don't make it weird. She made a sound that was closer to a laugh than anything she'd produced in 3 weeks. I'll try, she said. After she hung up, she went back to the Dodge Ram. She cleaned the head, checked the block surface for warping, ordered the replacement gasket from the supplier in Phoenix. She worked with a methodical focus that was her natural mode, the one she returned to when everything else was uncertain. It was the day after that call that the thing happened, which she would remember for the rest of her life as the moment the story changed character. Not in direction, because the direction had been set the night she'd called Ryder, but in scale, in the size of what was actually in motion. She was having coffee in the kitchen at 7 in the morning when she heard a vehicle, then another, then several close together. She went to the window. 3 trucks were parked along the highway shoulder just outside her property line. Not inside at the edge, carefully outside. Men were unloading from them. She counted 8, 9, 10, and they were not doing anything threatening or even notable. They were just there, standing talking to each other, drinking coffee from thermoses. Several of them wore cuts. She went outside. The nearest one, a big man, dark-haired, mid-40s, looked at her and raised his chin. Morning, he said. Morning, and she said, who are you? Friends of Ryder's, he said. He said to stay outside your line. We're outside your line. She looked at the trucks, at the men, at the way they were positioned, not menacing, not aggressive, but very visible, right on the highway shoulder, in full view of anyone driving past. What are you doing? She said. Just visiting the area, the man said. Might be here a few days. She understood then. Victor Crane had sent someone to watch her property, and now someone was watching the watchers, not confrontationally, not in a way that could be called anything other than a group of men parked on a public highway shoulder, but watching. You want coffee? She said. The man with the dark hair almost smiled. I'd appreciate that. She went inside and made a full pot and brought it out with a stack of paper cups and stood in her driveway and poured coffee for 10 strangers who had driven from wherever they'd driven from to stand on the shoulder of a desert highway so that she would not be alone. She didn't have words for what that was. She stood with the coffee pot and she didn't try to find them. 2 days later, Marcus Webb made a decision. Ryder called her on a Tuesday afternoon. She was under the Dodge Ram, the new head gasket and torquing the bolts in the specified sequence, and his voice had a different quality to it. Not excited, Ryder didn't do excited, but settled, the way a correctly tensioned bolt felt under the torque wrench when it reached spec. Webb talked, Ryder said. She slid out from under the truck. To who? A journalist, Ryder said, an investigative journalist at the Arizona Republic. Not a blog, not a podcast, the paper. Someone who covers land fraud and municipal corruption. Webb gave him everything: names, dates, the process Crane uses. The county contacts the shell company chain. The journalist has been building the story for 3 days. He called Crane for comment this morning. Evelyn was very still. Crane knows, she said. Crane knows, Ryder confirmed. What does that mean for the legal case? It means the people inside the county system who've been cooperating with Crane have a reason to stop cooperating, Ryder said. It means the tax case and the code violations suddenly have very little institutional backing. When the article comes out, could be as early as next week, anyone with their name connected to Crane's operation is going to be looking for distance. And the property claim, your attorney needs to file for discovery today, Ryder said. Full discovery, every document they have. Do it before the article drops. When the article comes out, they'll be in damage control and less focused on the case. You want the request in before that moment. She called Sandra before she'd finished the conversation with Ryder. Sandra filed the discovery motion that afternoon. That same evening, while Evelyn was eating dinner soup, the practical kind she made in a large pot and lived on for several days, the kind of cooking that was about fuel rather than pleasure, her phone rang with a number she recognized as the county tax authority. The woman on the other end was not the same woman she'd spoken to at the beginning of all this. This one was more senior, and her voice had the particular quality of someone making a call they had not wanted to make. Ms. Harper, she said, I'm calling regarding your appeal of the tax reassessment filed in your property account. Yes, Evelyn said. Upon internal review, we have identified certain procedural irregularities in the original reassessment process. We are withdrawing the assessment pending a complete internal audit. You will receive written confirmation within 48 hours. The pending lien action has been suspended as of this afternoon. Evelyn set her soup spoon down. Withdrawn, she said. Pending audit, the woman said. Yes. And the lien? Suspended. Evelyn looked across the kitchen at nothing in particular, at the wall, at Roy's old calendar that she'd never taken down. Thank you, she said, because it was what you said, even when the person on the other end of the phone was delivering justice that should never have required this much work to arrive. She called Ryder. Tax assessment's been withdrawn, she said when he picked up. 3 seconds of silence. Good, he said. It's the Marcus Webb effect, she said. Partly, he said. Partly it's your documentation. You built a record they couldn't manipulate. That mattered. She sat at Roy's desk. It was 9 o'clock at night, and the garage was quiet, and the desert outside was doing its slow cooling, the temperature dropping in the way it always did after dark, the air settling into something different from the day. She could hear a coyote somewhere to the east, its voice thin and precise against the silence. Ryder, she said, the people who came, the men who have been on the highway's shoulder. What about them? They're still there, she said. I know. They've been there 3 days. I know, he said again. Nobody's asked them to leave, she said. It's a public highway, Ryder said, and she could hear something under the straightforward statement, not quite humor, but its dry, close cousin. I want to understand something, she said. The original deed, mind the real one. Do you know where it is? The pause was brief but present. Working on it, he said, is it findable? Yes, he said with a certainty that she recognized. The certainty of someone who knew who already had enough to say yes with confidence. It'll come back to you. She didn't ask how or from where. She had made her decision to trust the process, and she was going to honor it. There's a forensic document examiner coming next week to look at the forged deed, she said. Sandra arranged it, court credentialed. Good, Ryder said. When she looks at it, she'll find what needs to be found. You already know what she'll find, Evelyn said. I know what a forged document looks like, Ryder said simply. She almost asked the follow-up, how do you know what's your background? What have you seen in your life that taught you to read forgeries and pull county records and find former employees willing to talk to journalists? She didn't ask, not because she didn't want to know, but because some things were offered when the time was right and not before, and she was old enough to understand the difference between appropriate curiosity and the kind that overreached. The men on the highway, she said instead, are they safe? They're fine, he said. They know what they're doing. That's not what I asked, she said. Another pause. This one longer and different, the kind that came before something genuine rather than something strategic. Yeah, he said. They're safe. Nobody's going to bother them. Good, she said. Evelyn, he said. What? You called me 3 weeks ago, he said. I need you to understand something. I didn't activate people because we have the resources. I didn't do it because it was strategically useful. I did it because of what you did in that garage in the rain. Every person you've seen, every person working on this, they know the story. They came because of you. She looked at Roy's desk, at the tools, at the calendar. Roy would have said something practical about that, she said. He would have said something like, well, the bikes needed fixing. Yeah, Ryder said, the bikes needed fixing. She exhaled slowly through her nose and felt something that was not quite relief and not quite peace, but was somewhere close to both of them, the feeling of a weight being distributed rather than carried alone, the mechanical advantage that came from having more points of contact with the load. Get some sleep, Ryder said. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Why, she said. Because tomorrow the journalist calls Crane for a second comment, he said. And when Crane gets that call, things are going to start moving fast. How fast, she said. Fast enough that you should sleep now while you still can, he said. She hung up the phone and sat at Roy's desk for a few more minutes. Then she got up and went to bed. In the morning, the men were still on the highway shoulder. She brought them coffee again, and one of them, a quiet older man with a silver beard and steady eyes, looked at her while she poured and said without preamble, "He's not going to get your land." It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact delivered with the confidence of someone who had assessed a situation fully and reached a conclusion he was prepared to stand behind. The kind of confidence that had nothing performative in it. "I know," Evelyn said, and for the first time in weeks, she said it because she believed it. She went back inside and opened the garage and started work on the Dodge Ram, fitting the heads back, working through the torque sequence with care, listening to the engine come back together under her hands the way engines did when you gave them the right treatment at the right time. Outside, the desert morning was beginning its slow, indifferent warming. Down the highway in the direction of Phoenix, Victor Crane was picking up the phone. And very far away, in a way she couldn't fully see yet, things were beginning to move. The journalist's second call to Victor Crane happened at 9:14 on a Wednesday morning. Evelyn knew the exact time because Ryder texted her when it happened, just the time, nothing else, which was how she had come to understand his communication style: precise, minimal. Each word doing the work of 10. She was in the garage when the text arrived, standing at the workbench, organizing the parts for the Dodge Ram's final assembly, and she looked at the number 914 and understood that somewhere in Phoenix, in whatever office or house or car Victor Crane occupied at that hour, a phone call was changing the shape of his morning in a way that he had not anticipated and could not contain. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. The men on the highway shoulder had changed shifts overnight. The original 10 had been replaced by a different group. Same number, different faces. The kind of rotation that spoke of organization and planning rather than casual presence. She had brought them coffee at 7 without being asked, and the new group had accepted it with the same quiet thanks as the first, and she had gone back to the garage without discussion, the routine of it settling into something almost comfortable. Tom Briggs called at 10. "Something's happening," he said, and his voice had an urgency that Tom didn't usually carry. Tom was a man who processed events deliberately, a quality Evelyn had always respected in him. "There's a truck been parked at the top of my road since last night. Dark, no plates I can see from the house." Evelyn was already reaching for her phone to call Ryder before Tom finished the sentence. "Is it still there now?" she said. "Far as I can tell," Tom said. "Go inside and stay there," she said. "Don't go near it. I'll call you back." She called to Ryder. He picked up before the second ring. "There's a vehicle at my neighbor's road," she said. "Tom Briggs, dark truck, no visible plates, there since last night." "I know about it," Ryder said. She paused. "You know about it." "It's being handled," he said. "The people on your highway are aware. Tom is being watched." "Watched how?" "The same way you're being watched," Ryder said. "Nobody goes anywhere alone right now." She absorbed that. "Crane is escalating," she said. "The journalist's call this morning shook something loose," Ryder said. "When a man's strategy starts collapsing, he doesn't always choose to go quiet. Sometimes he goes harder. We're prepared for that." "What does harder look like?" she said. Ryder was quiet for the beat, the kind of pause that meant he was choosing how much to say and in what order. "Just stay in the garage today," he said. "Don't drive anywhere. If anything changes on your property, call me before you do anything else." The call ended, and she stood in the middle of the garage and made a conscious decision not to be afraid. Fear was information. It told you something important was at stake and that attention was required. She had received that information. She had acted on it. Sitting inside the fear and letting it run was not useful. She went back to the Dodge Ram. She was installing the valve covers, the engine almost fully reassembled now, when she smelled it. Not immediately alarming smoke happened in garages was a natural byproduct of hot metal and oil and combustion. But this was different. This was the particular acrid quality of something burning that wasn't supposed to be burning, a smell with volume to it, with insistence, not the ambient background smell of a working shop, but something else. She stepped out of the garage and turned toward the storage unit. The back corner of the storage unit was on fire. Not a small fire, not the kind of fire that came from a cigarette or a fallen lamp or an accidental ignition. The kind of fire that had been started deliberately with something that burned fast and hot, because the corner was already well involved and the flames were moving with the purposeful energy of accelerated combustion, climbing the old wooden wall studs, taking the shelving, moving toward the connected rear wall of the structure. She called 911. She called a Ryder. She grabbed the extinguisher from the garage and ran toward the storage unit and got the nozzle aimed at the base of the fire and worked it, and the extinguisher was industrial size and she used all of it, and it wasn't enough. The fire was too far along, had too much fuel in the shelving and the dry desert-cured wood of the structure, and she stepped back because getting closer was going to kill her, and the extinguisher was empty. She stood back and watched her storage unit burn. She watched 30 years of accumulated parts and materials and Roy's tools and Roy's inventory and the things she had kept because they were useful and the things she had kept because she couldn't let them go. She watched all of it burn in the 14 minutes it took the fire department to arrive. She stood in the lot and she held her phone and she watched the fire take the structure with a thoroughness that was almost complete by the time the first truck came through her gate. She was still standing there when Ryder called back, and she picked up and said simply, "They burned the storage unit." His response was immediate. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Anyone else on the property?" "No." "Are the fire department there?" "Just arrived," she said. "Don't go anywhere," he said. "I mean it. Don't leave the property." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. She watched the firefighters work. She answered the questions from the fire marshal, a careful, specific series of questions about fuel storage, recent electrical work, anyone who might have had access to the property. She told him about the broken lock 3 weeks ago. She told him about Victor Crane. She told him about the code enforcement visits and the threats. She gave him Sandra's name and Dan's name and the police report number from the break-in. The fire marshal's name was Garrett, and he had the look of a man who had seen arson enough times to recognize it without needing a lab report. He was writing everything down. "I'm going to need to do a detailed examination of the burn pattern once it's safe to enter," he said. "But I want to be straight with you, what you're describing, the accelerant smell, the speed of involvement, the location starting at the back corner, away from any plausible, accidental ignition source that's consistent with intentional fire." "I know it's intentional," Evelyn said. "I understand," Garrett said. "We're going to document it properly." She called Sandra from the driveway while the fire marshal was still working. Sandra's response was immediate and sharp. "This is a criminal act," Sandra said. "This changes everything legally and strategically. File a supplemental police report today, not tomorrow. Cross-reference it to the original break-in report. And Evelyn, this is the moment where Crane has crossed from civil wrongdoing into criminal liability. If the arson investigation connects to him, we're talking about felony charges." "He was careful," Evelyn said. "Arson investigators are good," Sandra said. "And your fire marshal already has the context. Let him work." The fire marshal worked for 4 hours. His initial assessment delivered to Evelyn in the late afternoon while the ruins of the storage unit were still smoking was a single word she had been waiting for: accelerant. 2 distinct pour patterns, he said. Starting points in 2 separate corners, which meant 1 person or 2 people working quickly, designed for maximum involvement. Evelyn called Ryder with the assessment. "Accelerant," he said. 2 pour points. "Yes." The fire marshal's name. "Garrett," she said, "works out of the county office." "Good man," Ryder said, and the certainty in it suggested he knew the name, which stopped her for a second, but she had long since stopped being surprised by the breadth of what Ryder seemed to know and who he seemed to know it about. "What happens now?" she said. "Now," Ryder said, "Crane makes his last move." She didn't have to wait long to find out what that looked like. Victor Crane arrived at her property at 5:30 in the afternoon while the fire marshal's team was still packing up. He came alone this time, no expensive suit, no practiced charm. He wore the look of a man who had decided that polish was no longer worth the effort. He got out of the SUV and walked toward her where she was standing in the lot, and she watched him come, and she did not move to meet him or step back from him. She stood where she was and waited. "I told you this would get complicated," he said. He stopped about 8 feet from her, which was a distance that felt calculated, close enough to be personal, far enough to be deniable. You burned my storage unit, she said. I don't know what you're referring to, he said, and this time the flatness in his voice was different. It wasn't the controlled flatness of a practiced denial. It was the flatness of a man who had stopped performing and was simply saying the words because they were the words to say. The fire marshal is 20 feet behind you, Evelyn said. He's been here all day. Crane didn't look back. I came to make you a final offer, he said. Not a conversation, a final offer. The number has gone down since the last time. That's the reality of negotiation. When one side doesn't move, the other side adjusts its position. She looked at him. She had spent 3 weeks watching this man systematically attack everything she had, her tax record, her title, her property, her structure, her sense of safety. She had watched him work through channels and through money and through the quiet arrangement of systems that were supposed to protect people. She had called in help from strangers and rebuilt her defense piece by piece and watched the first pieces of his operation begin to crack. And now he was standing in her driveway the day after his people had set fire to her land and offering her a lower number than last time. Leave, she said. Mr. Harper, leave my property, she said now. He looked at her for a long moment. The same calculation she'd seen before, measuring resistance testing load, figuring out how much pressure was left to apply. You're making a mistake, he said. Get out of here, she said. And there was something in her voice that was different from the last time she'd said it, not louder, not more emotional, but stripped down to something so direct and final that even Victor Crane could read it. He looked at her for one more second. Then he got in his car and left. Garrett, the fire marshal, came up beside her. That the developer, he said. Yes, she said. Garrett watched the SUV until it was gone. I'm going to need a full statement from you about his prior contact with you and with this property, he said. Every interaction, every communication, every threat, starting from the first letter. I have documentation of all of it, she said. I've been keeping records since the beginning. Garrett looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Good, he said. That's exactly what we need. That night, she sat at Roy's desk and called Ryder, and for the first time in all the calls they'd had, she didn't have anything specific to report. She just called. He answered. He came back, she said. I know, Ryder said. Garrett called it in. Garrett called it in to you, she said. To people I know, Ryder said, without elaborating. She decided not to push it. He offered me less money than last time, she said. He's scared, Ryder said. A man who burns something and then comes back offering money that's someone who has run out of sequence. He expected the fire to break you. You're still standing, and he doesn't have another move that isn't visible now. What's he going to do, she said. Depends on how scared he is, Ryder said. But Evelyn, I need to tell you something. Are you sitting down? The question was unusual enough that she registered it. Yes, she said. The article is running tomorrow morning, he said. Arizona Republic front page of the Metro section. Web version goes up at midnight tonight. Web is named. The shell company chain is documented. The county board connections are documented. The specific case of your property is named in the article. You're named. Your situation is described. The fabricated tax debt, the forged deed, the arson investigation. All of it. She was quiet for a moment. My name is in the article. Yes, he said. I wanted your permission before it ran. The journalist asked for it, but it was already too late to take it out tonight and the presses are running. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, she said. It needed to come out. Yes, he said. It needed to come out. What happens after tomorrow, she said. Things move very fast, he said. The article is going to generate attention. Other media, social media people who have had dealings with Crane County officials who want to get in front of the story. The people who made the code board decisions are going to have very uncomfortable phones tomorrow morning. The tax authority has already started its internal audit that's going to accelerate. Sandra's discovery motion becomes very powerful in the context of a published investigation. And the arson. The fire marshal's report goes to the county attorney's office, he said, with the article providing context, the pattern of conduct, the prior contact, the escalation. The basis for a criminal investigation is strong. She sat with all of this, the weight of it, the scale of what had been built in the weeks since she'd picked up the phone and called a man she barely knew. Ryder, she said. Yeah. How many people are coming, she said. He was quiet for a moment. More than you're thinking, he said. Give me a number. I don't have a final count, he said. It's still growing. Chapters from 3 states have confirmed. More coming in from outside that. I told them to be respectful of the property, respectful of you. No disruption. They understand. These are people who want to help. What they can build, what they can bring lumber, materials, tools, equipment. People who know how to use all of it. What you lost in that fire, they want to rebuild it. She didn't say anything. You okay? Ryder said. I'm sitting in my dead husband's chair, she said, in a garage that's been here for 30 years, and strangers are going to come and rebuild what was burned because I fixed their bikes in the rain. She paused. It's a lot to hold. Yeah, he said, it is. Roy would have had something practical to say about it, she said. What do you think he would have said? She thought about it honestly. About Roy, who had built this place with his hands and his stubbornness, who had never done anything for show, who had been the most practically generous person she had ever known. He would have said, make sure they have enough to eat, she said. Ryder made the sound that she had come to recognize as his version of a laugh. We'll handle the food, he said. She went to bed that night and did not sleep immediately, which was expected. She lay in the dark and thought about the article running at midnight, about her name being in it, about what it meant to have your private battle made public. She thought about Roy. She thought about the night she had opened the garage door in the rain, which had not felt like a significant decision at the time. It had felt like the obvious thing, the only thing a person with her skills and her tools and her understanding of what she was looking at could reasonably do. Help them, fix the bikes, send them back on the road. She had not been performing generosity. She had simply been herself in her fullest, most natural form. And all of this, the investigation and the article and the people on the highway shoulder and the phone call with Ryder and the thing that was coming was what that had grown into. She fell asleep at 2 a.m. At 4:17, her phone buzzed. She picked it up expecting Ryder. It was a number she didn't recognize, a Phoenix area code. Ms. Harper. The voice was male, older measured. My name is David Lowell. I'm a deputy county attorney for Maricopa County. I apologize for the hour. I'm calling because the arson investigation report from Fire Marshal Garrett has been forwarded to my office, and I'm also looking at a published article in the Arizona Republic that went live approximately 90 minutes ago. He paused. I want you to know that our office is opening a formal criminal investigation into Victor Crane and associated entities effective as of this phone call. She sat up in bed. A formal investigation, she said. Yes, ma'am. I also want you to know that the property lien that was pending against your address has been formally stayed by our office pending the outcome of this investigation, and we are requesting a complete freeze on the property claim proceedings in civil court until the criminal matter is resolved. Another pause. I understand you have been through a significant ordeal. I want you to know this office should have been involved earlier. I'm sorry that it took this long. She was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? She said. Everything you have, he said. All of your documentation. We'd like to schedule an in-person meeting in the next 48 hours if you're willing. I'm willing, she said. She called Ryder at 4:30. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was awake, which meant he had been waiting. The county attorney's office called, she said. Criminal investigation into Crane. The lien is stayed. Dean, the property proceedings are frozen. I know, he said. You know because Lowell is a good man and he moves fast when he has what he needs to move, Ryder said, and because we made sure he had what he needed to move. She let that settle. How long, she said. How long have you been building this? Since the night you called me, he said. We started that night. You started a criminal investigation from a phone call, she said. We started gathering what was already there, he said. Crane's operation had been running long enough to leave tracks. We just followed them and handed the information to the right people. The right people, she said, people who wanted to do the right thing but didn't have the full picture. He said, Webb was the key. Once Webb talked, the picture completed itself. She was silent for a moment. Outside, the pre-dawn desert was doing its quiet breathing. That particular stillness that existed only in the hour before the light came and everything started again. When are they coming? She said. The people you mentioned. Dawn, he said. Some of them are already on the road. Others are going to see the article and start coming when it's daylight. Dawn today. Dawn today, he said. She looked at the clock. It was 4:42 in the morning. Then I should get up. she said. Get some coffee going, he said. A lot of coffee. She got up, she made coffee. She went to the garage and turned on the lights, and the garage looked the way it always looked, the tools in their places, the workbench clear from last night's cleanup, the Dodge Ram in the center bay, with its engine fully assembled and waiting for its test start. Roy's stool pulled out where she'd left it. She walked through the space and touched the walls and the workbench and the tool chest the way she sometimes did in quiet moments, feeling the solidity of the place, the 30 years embedded in every surface. The storage unit was gone. She could see the remains of it through the back window. The blackened foundation, the fallen structure, the ash of 30 years of accumulation. She let herself look at it for a moment. Not to grieve it, she had done whatever grieving she was going to do the night of the fire, but to see it clearly, to understand what had been taken. Then she turned back to the garage. She was on her third cup of coffee when she heard the first one. A single engine coming from the east, from the direction of the highway, the distinctive sound of a Harley at highway speed beginning to decelerate. She walked to the garage door and it looked on out. One bike, then three behind it, then more coming around the long curve of the highway where it bent toward her property, headlights still on in the early morning gray, a line of them that didn't end when she expected it to end. She stood in the doorway and watched them come. More than she had counted on, more than the number in her head that she had built from what Ryder had told her. They filled the highway and her lot and the road and the shoulder in both directions, and they kept coming single file on the highway and then spreading as they entered her land, organized, purposeful, not a crowd but a formation, people who knew how to occupy space without chaos. She couldn't count them. They were still arriving. Ryder's bike came in from the middle of the column, and he pulled up in front of her and cut the engine and got off, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her the night she'd finished his cruise bikes. That measuring, recalibrating, looked the one that had something more honest under it than its surface suggested. Morning, he said. Morning, she said. He looked past her at the garage, at the ruins of the storage unit visible at the back, at the property in the early light. You doing okay, he said. Ask me again in an hour, she said. He nodded. That was sufficient. Behind him, the flatbed trucks were arriving. She hadn't seen them initially because she'd been watching the bikes, but now she registered them. Large loaded tarps over their cargo. Lumber, steel, equipment. She could tell from the weight and the height of what was under those tarps. Construction materials. Real ones in serious quantities. How much did they bring, she said. Enough to rebuild what burned, Ryder said. And more. A man she didn't recognize, heavy-set, built like someone who had poured concrete for 40 years, wearing a work vest over his cut, came up to Ryder and said something low. Ryder turned to Evelyn. He needs to know where your property lines run, he said, for the foundation work. She went and showed the man her property lines. He walked them with her, measuring with his eyes the way experienced builders did, making notes on a pad he pulled from his vest. When they'd completed the circuit, he said, We'll have the foundation cleared and poured by end of day. Frame goes up tomorrow. She looked at him. The whole frame? We've got 40 people who frame for a living, he said, and another 60 who can follow direction. Yeah, the whole frame. She didn't have a response to that, so she nodded. Dozer appeared at her elbow. She recognized him, the man from the night of the storm who had watched her hands while she worked, who had sat backward on the folding chair. He was grinning, which was different from how she remembered him. You look like you need more coffee, he said. I've had 3 cups, she said. You need a 4th, he said. Big day. Sandra Okafor called at 7:15 as the construction preparation was beginning in earnest around her. I assume you've seen the article, Sandra said, and her voice had the quality of someone who had been awake since midnight. I've been busy, Evelyn said. The discovery motion we filed yesterday, Crane's attorneys called this morning to say they're withdrawing the property claim. Evelyn stopped walking. Withdrawing. Completely, Sandra said. No negotiation, no settlement demand, withdrawn. The article named their shell company structure in enough detail that continuing the claim creates additional criminal exposure. They made a calculation. It's over, Evelyn said. The property claim is over. The property claim is over, Sandra said. The tax reassessment was already withdrawn. The code violations are under review and will almost certainly be reversed given the board investigation. What remains is the criminal matter, which is now in the county attorney's hands. Sandra paused. Evelyn, do you understand what I'm telling you? Your property is yours, clearly, unambiguously, legally yours. Nobody is taking it. She stood in the middle of her lot, surrounded by the sound of motorcycles and people unloading equipment, and someone calling out measurements with the morning sun, just clearing the eastern ridge and the ruins of the storage unit, still smoking faintly at the back. And she heard Sandra tell her that the property was hers. She closed her eyes for a second. Thank you, Sandra, she said. Thank your documentation, Sandra said, and thank whoever made the call to Marcus Webb, because without that, I'm not sure how long this would have taken. She hung up and turned to find Ryder standing nearby, close enough to have heard the one-sided conversation. He read her face and said nothing. He didn't need to. The property claim is withdrawn, she said. He nodded. Sandra says the property is clearly mine, she said. It always was, he said. She looked at him at the gray beard, the gray hair, the road-worn face that had been the first thing she'd seen through her garage window on the night of the storm, the face of a man she had decided to help without asking who he was or what he needed or what it might cost her. She had simply looked at 6 broken machines in a group of wet, stranded strangers and done what she knew how to do. You came back, she said. We came back, he said, and gestured at the hundreds of people working behind him. The trucks unloading, the construction teams already marking out the foundation area, the food being set up by a group of women who had arrived in 2 vans and immediately established a cooking operation that smelled, even from across the lot, like something substantial and real. Roy would have wanted to help them build it, Evelyn said. Tell me about Roy, Ryder said. She looked at him to see if he meant it. He did, she could tell. Maybe later, she said, when it gets quiet. Deal, he said. A shout went up from the foundation crew. Something had been confirmed, a measurement agreed upon, the beginning of something. She turned toward the sound, toward her land, her ruined storage unit, and the 60 people preparing to do something about it. She took a breath, and she walked toward them. She walked toward them, and they made room for her without being asked. That was the thing she noticed first, not the numbers, not the equipment, not the sheer organized scale of what was happening on her land. She noticed the way people moved when she came near, the way space opened naturally in front of her, without anyone directing it, the way heads turned and voices dropped briefly, and then continued, the specific quality of attention that a group of people gave to someone they had come specifically to help. It was not deference. It was something warmer and more honest than that. It was the behavior of people who knew why they were there and wanted her to know they knew. The foundation crew chief was a man named Dale, broad-shouldered, late 50s, the kind of physical competence that came from a lifetime of building things correctly and not accepting anything less. He showed her the plan on a weathered notepad, pencil sketched dimensions, and asked her 3 questions. How much storage did she need? Did she want it connected to the main garage structure or separate? And what was the load requirement for the heaviest equipment she'd need to store? She answered all 3 without hesitation because she had been thinking about those answers for years, every time she'd worked around the limitations of the original structure. She told him what she needed, he nodded and wrote it down and turned back to his crew, and the work resumed at a pace that told her this was not the first time these people had built something under time pressure with intention behind it. Ryder materialized at her shoulder. He's one of the best framers in the state, he said, nodding toward Dale. Done this for 30 years. He drove 6 hours last night to be here. Why, she said. Because he wanted to, Ryder said. That's the only reason anyone here has. She stood and watched Dale's crew work for a few minutes, and then she made herself stop watching and go do something useful, because standing and observing while other people worked was not in her nature, and her nature was not something she intended to change at 68. She went into the garage and started the Dodge Ram. The engine turned over on the first try, settled into an even idle, and stayed there. She listened to it for a full minute, the sound of something repaired completely, all cylinders firing in the right sequence. The harmonics of a machine that was running the way it was designed to run. She had spent 3 weeks rebuilding that engine alongside everything else that was happening, and hearing it run right gave her something that was simple and clean, in a way that everything else in the last month had not been. Tom Briggs arrived at 8:30, driving his truck with the careful precision of a man who had learned to drive in a different era and had never stopped driving that way. He got out and stood for a moment, taking in the scale of what was happening on Evelyn's property. The people, the equipment, the flatbeds, the construction activity already underway, And then he walked over to where Evelyn was standing, and he said nothing for a while, just stood beside her. Roy would have had something to say about this, he said finally. That's the second time someone said that to me this morning, she said. Because it's true, he said. You want to know what he would have said? He didn't wait for her answer. He would have said, Ev, I think we need a bigger coffee pot. She laughed. It came out of her without warning or preparation, full and real, the kind of laugh that happened when something hit exactly the right nerve between grief and joy. Tom looked at her with the satisfaction of a man who had known exactly what he was doing. Come on, she said. I'll show you what they're building. She walked him through it, and as they moved through the property, she found herself narrating things she hadn't consciously organized: the plan for the new structure, the improved dimensions, the way Dale had suggested, incorporating a separate parts storage section with proper fire suppression. She was thinking out loud, and Tom was listening in the way he always had, the way good people listen, which was fully and without interruption. By the time they'd completed the circuit, she had articulated something she hadn't quite known she was thinking, that the structure being built was going to be better than the one that had burned. Not just in materials or design, in what it represented. The burned one had been built in grief and stubbornness, built to maintain what she and Roy had made because she couldn't imagine losing it. This one was being built by choice, by community, by the specific human decision of hundreds of people to show up and use their hands. That's not nothing, Tom said. No, she said. It's not. Sandra called at 9:45. Evelyn stepped away from the construction noise to take it walking to the far side of the garage where it was quieter. I need to tell you something, Sandra said, and the professional precision of her voice had been replaced by something more unguarded, which was the first time Evelyn had heard Sandra sound anything other than completely composed. The forensic document examiner filed her preliminary report this morning. The 1987 deed that Crane submitted the paper was manufactured no earlier than 1998. The ink composition is laser printed, incompatible with any printing technology available in 1987. She's prepared to testify. We knew that, Evelyn said. Yes, Sandra said, but knowing it and proving it in court are different things. Now we can prove it. Document fraud in a civil property proceeding carries up to 3 years. When you stack that with the arson investigation, the tax manipulation, the code board connections, David Lowell's office is building a case that has real teeth. She paused. Evelyn Victor Crane is going to prison. She let that sentence do its work. Let it settle from statement into reality, the way large facts require time to become real rather than just words. How long? She said. Criminal proceedings take time, Sandra said. But Lowell called me this morning and told me his office is treating this as high priority. He's angry, the good kind of angry, the professional kind, the kind that produces thorough prosecution. What do I need to do? Keep your records, Sandra said. Be available when Lowell's team needs you. And Evelyn, live your life. The legal machinery is running. You've given it everything it needs. Let it run. She thanked Sandra and put the phone in her pocket and stood for a moment with her hand resting on the garage wall. The exterior surface warm from the morning sun, the 30-year-old wood she and Roy had painted 4 times the texture of it, something she knew the way she knew the handles of her own tools. She had spent 11 years maintaining this place alone. She had built a wall between herself and needs so carefully and so thoroughly that she had almost not called Ryder when the wall started crumbling. Almost. Because 68 years of life had also taught her, somewhere underneath the stubbornness, that walls built to protect you could also seal you in, and that knowing when to open a door was not the same as admitting weakness. Roy had taught her that, by loving her when she was difficult, by staying when she pushed, by choosing her day after day in the ordinary, in the hard, in the everything in between. She missed him with a sharpness that surprised her even now 11 years in. The grief had changed form many times, from immediate and consuming to chronic and manageable to something more like a companion present, but no longer debilitating. But it had never fully gone, and she had stopped expecting it to. She carried him the way you carried anything essential without thinking about it, just built into the structure of how you move through the world. She pushed off the wall and went back to the work. The food operation had scaled up considerably by 10 o'clock. The 2 vans from earlier had been joined by a pickup truck with a flatbed grill and 2 propane burners, and the smell of actual cooking, not donated pastries or packaged food, but real cooking. Bacon and eggs, in quantities designed to feed a crew, had pulled workers toward the makeshift kitchen in a steady drift. Evelyn walked past it, and one of the women manning the grill, 60s, red-haired, with the efficient warmth of someone who had fed large groups her whole life, handed her a plate without asking. "Eat," the woman said. "You look like you've been running on coffee since last Tuesday." Evelyn ate, scrambled eggs and bacon and toast, standing at the edge of the lot with a paper plate, watching Dale's crew sink the first anchor bolts into the concrete pad that had been poured while she wasn't looking. Fast work, efficient work, the kind that came from knowing exactly what you were doing and having the people and materials to do it without compromise. "That's faster than I expected," she said to no one in particular. "Dale doesn't believe in slow," said Dozer, appearing at her elbow with his own plate. He had the satisfied expression of a man in his natural element. He built a full garage structure in 2 days once on a bet. Lost the bet because he finished in a day and a half. "Is that true?" she said. "Completely," Dozer said. "The other guy still owes him $50. He's never collected. Says the look on his face was worth more." She ate, she watched, she talked to people she hadn't met who had driven from New Mexico and Nevada and Utah, who had heard the story and come because the story had done something to them that they couldn't entirely articulate but understood well enough to act on. She heard her own name in their mouths, not as celebrity, not as spectacle, but as something closer to a fixed point, a reference, a thing that meant what it was supposed to mean. A woman who helped strangers for nothing and then needed help herself and got it. The simplicity of that arc was not lost on her. She had lived long enough to know that simple wasn't the same as easy, and that the stories that lasted were usually the ones that didn't require explanation. At 11, Ryder found her and said there was someone she needed to talk to. She followed him to the far side of the lot, away from the construction noise, where a man was waiting. Slight mid-50s, the kind of face that had been under fluorescent office lighting for enough years that it had forgotten what direct sun felt like. He looked nervous in the way of people who had made a significant decision and were still processing the weight of it. "Marcus Webb," Ryder said and stepped back. She looked at the man, at the person who had worked for Victor Crane for 4 years and known what was being done to people like her, and said nothing for most of that time, and then said something when it mattered. She thought about what she wanted to say to that kind of person and what she felt about it, and whether those two things were the same. They were not. "You worked for him," she said. "Yes," Webb said. "You knew what he was doing." Webb was quiet for a moment. "Not all of it," he said. "Not right away. By the time I understood the full picture." He stopped, started again. "I stayed longer than I should have. I know that. I left when I couldn't stay anymore. I should have left sooner. I should have talked sooner. I know that too." She looked at him. His hands were slightly unsteady. He hadn't slept. She could tell the specific exhaustion of someone who had done something irrevocable and was living in the immediate aftermath of it, the adrenaline still metabolizing. "Why did you talk?" she said. "Why now?" He looked past her for a moment, at the construction, at the people, at all of it. "Someone told me your story," he said. "What you did, the bikes, the storm, the garage, what he did to you after. I'd been sitting on everything for 18 months, telling myself the right time would come, the right situation. And then someone told me about you, and I thought," he stopped again. "I thought if she could open a garage door for strangers in the middle of the night, I could make a phone call." She was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. The words were plain. She didn't add to them because the plainness was the point. He had done something real, and it had cost him something real, and the thing you said to that was, "Thank you," without decoration. He nodded. He looked like a man who had needed to hear it and hadn't been sure he would. Ryder walked him to his car 20 minutes later, and Evelyn watched them go, and then she turned back to the construction site where Dale was running through a measurement check on the first wall frame, with 3 of his crew calling out numbers in the clipped shorthand of experienced builders. She went to Dale. "Can I help?" she said. He looked at her, measured her the way tradespeople measured each other, not skeptically but honestly, reading what she was. "You do any framing?" he said. "I've put up walls," she said. "Darling, like this scale, but I know which end of a hammer to hold." "Then hold it," he said, and handed her a framing nailer. She spent the next 3 hours working alongside Dale's crew. She wasn't the fastest person there, and she wasn't trying to be. She worked at her own pace, which was steady and accurate, the same qualities she brought to engine work. She fit into the crew without friction, taking direction when direction was given, making decisions when decisions were hers to make, and the crew absorbed her the way good crews absorbed capable people, without comment and without ceremony. Carol Reeves arrived at noon with her pickup truck loaded with food she had cooked since early morning. 2 roasting pans of enchiladas, a pot of beans, a cooler of drinks. She set up beside the existing food operation without being asked, and the 2 women running the grill welcomed her without introduction, the easy communication of people who understood each other's practical language. Pete Galvez came at 12:30, moving slowly on account of his hip, but moving nonetheless, and stood watching the framing progress with the evaluative eye of someone who had spent a professional lifetime measuring how things were built, and then turned to Evelyn and said, "They're doing it right." "I can see that," she said. "Roy would have approved of the corner connections," Pete said. "He was always particular about corners." She looked at Pete. "You knew Roy." "I surveyed this property when you bought it," Pete said. "Roy walked the whole line with me, 4 hours in July, 103 degrees. He never complained once, just asked questions." He smiled at the memory. He was particular about knowing exactly what he owned. She felt the grief move through her, not the sharp version, not the consuming version, but the companion version, the one that was also love, because grief without love was not grief, just loss. She felt it move, and she let it move, and she kept working. David Lowell called at 1 in the afternoon. She stepped off the framing crew to take it, and Lowell's voice had the controlled energy of a prosecutor who had spent the morning building something solid. "Ms. Harper," he said, "I want to update you on some developments. Victor Crane's primary legal counsel contacted our office this morning. Crane is represented now by criminal defense attorneys. That's a significant change. It means he's expecting charges." "Is he right to expect them?" she said. "Yes," Lowell said. "I'm going to tell you something I don't usually tell civilians this early in a process because you've earned the information. We found the deed." She went completely still. "My original deed," she said. "Yes. In the course of executing a search warrant at Crane's property management office this morning, we located several documents that had been removed from other properties, yours among them. Your original 1998 deed is in evidence. It will be returned to you as soon as it's been processed." She pressed her free hand flat against the garage wall, the warmth of it again in the familiar texture. "He kept it," she said. "He kept it," Lowell confirmed, "along with documentation of 8 other properties he's run similar operations against. You're not the only one, Ms. Harper. You're the one who fought back in a way that made the others visible." She heard the weight of that. 8 other people, 8 other properties, 8 other fights that had not perhaps ended the way hers was ending. "What happens to them?" she said. "The others?" "Our office is contacting each of them," Lowell said. "The investigation covers all cases. Some are further along in Crane's process. One family has already lost their property in a proceeding we're now reviewing for fraud. We're going to work to reverse that." A pause. "It's going to take time, but it's happening." She thanked him. She stood against the garage wall for a moment after the call ended. 8 people, 8 families, people who had gone through the same sequences. She had the tax letters, the false claims, the code violations, the manufactured pressure, and some of whom had not had a card in their pocket, with a name and a number on it, had not had 30 years of meticulous documentation in a fireproof cabinet, had not had the particular stubborn courage that had made her refuse Victor Crane not once but twice to his face. That was the thing she had not fully reckoned with until this moment, that what had happened to her was not unique. It was a method. It had been applied to people before her and would have been applied to people after her if Marcus Webb hadn't picked up the phone and she hadn't fought and the network hadn't moved. She went back to the framing crew and she worked harder than she had worked all morning. The walls went up in the early afternoon. There was a moment she would remember it for the rest of her life, when the first full wall section was lifted into place by 12 people working in coordinated silence. And Dale called the plumb, and his assistant confirmed the level, and the wall stood upright and true. And a sound went up from everyone watching that was not quite a cheer and not quite anything else, just the collective human expression of watching something that didn't exist 10 minutes ago exist now. She felt it in her chest, the sound of it, in the sight of the wall standing, in the 60 people, in the road bikers, and Tom Briggs, and Carol Reeves, and Pete Galvez, and Dozer grinning, and Dale calling the next measurement, and Ryder standing at the edge of it all, watching with his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing it did when he was feeling something he hadn't decided to express yet. The second wall went up, then the third. The structure was taking shape faster than she would have believed, the speed of it not cutting corners, but simply the product of knowing exactly what you were doing with enough people who knew the same thing. At 3 in the afternoon, Dale came to her with a nail and a hammer and held them out. "What's this?" she said. "First nail in the new frame is yours," he said. "That's how we do it." She looked at the nail, at the hammer, at the wall that was waiting. She took them. She walked to the frame, to the first wall that had gone up to the corner connection that Pete Galvez had said Roy would have approved of. She found the mark that Dale pointed to the right spot, the load-bearing point, the place where the nail would do actual work rather than symbolic work, because she would not drive a nail into something structural for show. She drove it. One solid stroke, clean flush set correctly. The sound it made when it went home, that specific impact of steel on steel, the satisfying report of a nail fully driven, seemed to carry across the lot, and the crowd that had gathered without her noticing went quiet for the precise moment of it, and then the sound came back. Not applause, or not just applause, but voices, a dozen languages of response that all meant the same thing. She handed the hammer back to Dale. "Good hit," he said. "I've had practice," she said. Ryder was beside her. He had moved from the edge without her hearing him, the way he moved generally quietly with the specific gravity of someone who didn't need to announce himself. "How are you doing?" he said. "I feel like I drove a nail into a wall," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You did." She looked at the structure around her, the walls standing, the crew moving through the second phase. Tom Briggs holding a brace on the east wall, while a younger man drove fasteners. Carol at the food table handing a plate to a biker she'd never met. Pete sitting in a folding chair. Someone had brought him, watching the build, with the satisfaction of a man who had spent a life watching things get built and still hadn't lost the pleasure of it. "He's going to prison," she said. "Yes," Ryder said. "8 other families," she said. He turned to look at her. "You heard about that." "Lowell called," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. 8, maybe more. The investigation's still going." "If I hadn't fought," she started. "But you did," he said. "Don't think about the version where you didn't." She stopped. He was right. The version where she hadn't fought was a road that led nowhere useful, and she had not survived 11 years alone by standing on roads that went nowhere. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "That night," she said, "when you left the garage, when you drove away in the rain, you gave me the card, but did you think you'd hear from me?" He was quiet for a beat longer than his usual silences. "No," he said. "Honestly, no, I thought you'd throw it away." "I almost did," she said. "What stopped you?" "I'm not sure," she said. "I think I looked at it and thought you were the first person to just say thank you and mean it, without asking what I wanted for it, without looking for the catch. She stopped. "You just fixed the bikes," he said. "And you just said thank you," she said. He nodded slowly. "That's worth more than most people know," he said. The build continued through the afternoon, and as the sun moved west and the shadows of the new walls stretched long across the lot, people who had not been there in the morning began arriving. The article had spread through the day, shared across platforms picked up by other outlets, the story moving through the specific channels of people who responded to stories like this, which turned out to be a large number of people distributed across a wide geography. A local news crew arrived, and she talked to them briefly, factually, without performance, because she was not interested in the performance of her own story, and she said so, and the reporter, a young woman who had the intelligence to understand that Evelyn's straightforwardness was the story, let her be exactly that. Tom Briggs talked to the camera with considerably more enthusiasm, which she appreciated. He had opinions about Victor Crane that were colorful and specific, and apparently had been accumulating for some time. At 4 in the afternoon, something happened that she had not expected and could not have prepared for. A car pulled into the lot, not a truck, not a motorcycle, just a car, a practical sedan, older model, well-maintained. A woman got out, late 50s, dark-haired, the look of someone who had driven a significant distance and had been bracing for this stop for the last 100 miles. She walked toward Evelyn directly, which suggested she knew who she was looking for. "Ms. Harper," she said. "My name is Patricia Odom. I had property in Pinal County. Crane's company took it 8 months ago through a process very similar to what I read about yours this morning. She stopped, swallowed once. I drove here because I needed to see it, see what... She looked at the build, at the people, at all of it. I needed to see what it looked like when it worked. Evelyn looked at this woman, at the 8 months of defeat she was carrying, visible in the specific way her body held itself, slightly forward, slightly braced, the posture of someone who had been absorbing blows and had stopped expecting them to stop. Come here, Evelyn said. She walked Patricia Odom through the property. She introduced her to Sandra's number, which she wrote on a piece of paper from the workbench. She told her about Lowell. She told her that Lowell's office was already looking at the other cases. She told her plainly and without minimizing that it was going to take time and it was going to be hard and that she would not be doing it alone. Patricia listened the way a person listened when they had been not listened to for a very long time. Why are you helping me? Patricia said. You don't know me. Evelyn looked at her. You came, she said. That's enough. Patricia Odom stayed for 3 hours. By the time she left, she had Sandra's information, Lowell's office number, and a plate of Carol's enchiladas that Carol had pressed on her with a firmness that brooked no refusal. She also had something less tangible, but more important, the look of a woman who had come in carrying defeat and was leaving carrying something else. Not victory that was still ahead of her, still uncertain, but possibility. The specific and powerful knowledge that her situation was not sealed, was not final, was not the end of the story. Evelyn watched her drive away and felt something complete itself that she couldn't name. The structure was roofed at 5:15. The crew put the last ridge beam in place as the sun was going gold and angled, and the shadows of the new walls stretched long and solid across the lot. And Dale called in the level 1 final time. Perfect, he said, dead perfect. And the crew below responded with the noise of people who had built something real and knew it. Evelyn stood under the new roof and put her hand on the ridge beam. The wood was smooth and raw and smelled like fresh lumber, like something new, like possibility in its most material form. She stood with her hand on it, and she thought about Roy, who had not been afraid of new things, even when they cost him, who had built this property from a piece of bare desert with a belief in useful work that he had passed to her, not by instruction, but by example, by doing it alongside her, by being the person he was for long enough that she had become, in ways she still sometimes discovered a person shaped by having known him. Good beam, Dale said, coming to stand beside her. Good beam, she agreed. The evening settled in the way desert evenings did, the temperature dropping with the swiftness that still surprised people who hadn't grown up with it, the sky going from gold to rose to something deeper and more complex that had no name in English. People gathered naturally, the construction noise giving way to voices and laughter. Food being handed around, fires being lit against the cooling air in the fire barrels that someone had produced from somewhere, as if this had been planned, which perhaps it had. Ryder sat down next to her on the tailgate of Tom's truck, which was where she'd ended up without quite deciding to. She handed him a cup of coffee from the thermos she'd been carrying since mid-afternoon. He took it. He looked out at the property, at the new structure, solid and true, lit from inside by the portable work lights that cast a warm, clean light through the open walls, at the people around the fire barrels, at the remains of the burned storage unit, which would be cleared tomorrow once the investigation team released the area. Tell me about Roy, he said. She looked at him. He had asked this morning and she had deferred, and he had accepted it, and he was asking again now in the dark with coffee when the day had settled into something that could hold a conversation like that. She told him. She told him about Roy Harper, who had been an indifferent student and a gifted mechanic who had found her car broken down on a highway in 1981 and fixed it in 40 minutes and asked for her number, and then not called for 3 weeks because he was nervous, which she had found out later. She told him about the early years, the arguments about money and the arguments about nothing, and the marriage finding its shape the way marriages did through collision and accommodation, in the slow discovery of the actual person you had committed to. She told him about Roy's hands, which were large and scarred and gentle in a way that contradicted their appearance. She told him about the property, how Roy had seen it and known immediately the way he sometimes knew things without being able to explain the knowing, and how she had trusted his certainty even when she couldn't share it. She told him about the last year when Roy's heart had given them signs they had not wanted to read, And then the morning when it had simply stopped while he was making breakfast, quietly without warning, the way a well-maintained engine could still fail, without notice the failure not in the maintenance, but in the irreducible uncertainty of all things. She told him that she had stood in the kitchen for 40 minutes before she called anyone, because she was not ready to make the call real, and that she had never told anyone that before. Ryder listened. He did not offer condolence or analysis or the uncomfortable social reflexes that other people offered. He listened the way he had listened to her on the phone 3 weeks ago, completely, with the specific quality of attention that made the person speaking feel that what they were saying was being held rather than simply heard. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth missing," he said. "He was," she said. "He is." They sat with that. The fire barrels threw warm light across the lot. Someone was playing music from a phone, something soft and country, a guitar and a voice. The desert beyond the property line was doing its dark and patient thing, indifferent and vast and somehow comforting in its indifference, the way large things that didn't need anything from you were sometimes comforting. "What do you need tomorrow?" Ryder said. "The investigation team needs to release the burn site," she said. "Then we can clear it. Dale said his crew can be back by 7 if needed." "They'll be back," he said. "And I need to call Lowell's office," she said. "Arrange the full statement." "Sandra should be on that call," he said. "She will be back, she said. He nodded. She looked at the new structure, at the walls standing, at the roof that had gone up in a single afternoon because 60 people had known what they were doing and had wanted to do it. "It's going to be better than the old one," she said. "Yes," he said. "Bigger," she said. "Better organized. Dale suggested a parts layout system I've been thinking about for years but never had the space for." "When did you tell him that?" "This morning," she said, "when he asked me what I needed." Ryder smiled. She could see it in profile, rare enough that she noticed it. "You were already designing the rebuild while they were still fighting the fire," he said. "The fire was out," she said. "It was the next problem. You moved to the next problem." "Yeah," he said. "You do." They were quiet again. Comfortable quiet, the kind that existed between people who had said the things that needed saying and were at rest with each other on the other side of them. The music from across the lot changed to something she half recognized, an older song, the kind that had been playing on the radio when she and Roy were young and driving through the desert before they knew what the desert would come to mean to them. "Ryder," she said. "Yeah." "What happens to you after this?" He considered it. "Back on the road," he said. "That's what we do." "You come back through here," she said. "The garage will be open." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "If the bikes need fixing, I'll fix them," she said. "That's not going to change." He nodded. It was a settling nod, the kind that confirmed something rather than simply agreed. "We'll come back through," he said. She put her coffee cup down on the truck bed and looked out at her property, at the new walls standing clean and true in the work light, at the people still moving through the lot, at Tom Briggs arguing cheerfully about something with one of the bikers from Nevada at Carroll, packing up the food operation, with the efficient satisfaction of a woman who had fed people well and knew it, at Dale's crew chief, walking the perimeter of the new structure one final time before the night. She looked at all of it and she felt something that was the composite of every feeling the last month had put through her, the fear and the winning and the exhaustion and the grief and the stubborn refusal to give ground and the specific inarticulate gratitude of someone who had opened a door in the rain and found out years later what had walked through it. The storage unit had burned. Victor Crane's operation was collapsing under the weight of its own exposure. The deed was coming home. The property was hers. 8 families were getting their stories looked at by people who would look honestly. Patricia Odom had driven home with Sandra's phone number and something to fight with. And on her land, in the desert, in the dark, under a new roof that 60 people had built because she had once fixed their bikes for free, something that had broken was made whole again. Not just a structure, something harder to build and harder to break. Roy Harper had known always that the only answer to a hard world was to be useful in it and not keep score. Evelyn Harper had learned it from him and lived it for 40 years, and on one particular stormy night had lived it for 6 wet strangers with broken machines and the world improbably, consequentially, in ways neither generosity nor calculation could have predicted, had answered. She was 68 years old. She was standing on her own land. The roof above her was solid, the walls were true, and she was not alone.